Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. It was the year 1832. I remember that because it was the first time I'd ever been hired by a foreigner, a British man named Hodgson. He was a resident, living out there in Kathmandu, and he was mad for collecting things. Birds mostly. He'd pay good money for specimens, and I was one of the best hunters in our village. I knew the trails, the valleys, the way the light fell through the pines at different hours. I'd been walking those mountains since I could walk. That day started like any other. The air was thin and sharp, the way it gets in the early morning at that altitude. You could see your breath, a little cloud of your own life hanging in front of you. I met Hodgson at his camp just as the sun was beginning to touch the highest peaks, turning the snow a soft, bloody pink. He was a serious man, quiet, with eyes that were always looking, always noting things down in his little book. He had his collecting gear, the gun, the jars, the packs, and I had my own rifle, the old flintlock my father had given me. It was more for show than anything. We were after birds, not bears. We set out along a ridge I knew well, one that overlooked a deep, shadowy gorge. The forest was thick there, ancient rhododendrons with trunks as wide as a man, and a floor so padded with needles and decay that our footsteps were swallowed up. It was a quiet place, not a peaceful quiet, but a heavy, waiting quiet, the kind of quiet that makes the back of your neck prickle. I remember feeling it that morning, unease that I put down to the strange company I was keeping. Hodgson was a good man, but he was from another world. His presence felt like a tear in the fabric of the mountains. We worked for hours. I'd spot a bird, a flash of color in the deep green, and point it out. Hodgson would take his shot, and I'd retrieve the specimen. He'd handle it with a strange reverence, measuring its beak, its wingspan, writing in his book. I didn't understand it, but I respected his passion. The sun climbed, and the day grew warmer. But in the deep shade of the forest, a chill lingered. It was past midday when we decided to cut down into the gorge. Hodgson had heard of a type of pheasant that nested in the cliffs there. The going was tough, steep and tangled with roots that snaked across the path like bony fingers. The air grew damper, colder. The sounds of the high forest, the chatter of monkeys, the call of birds, faded away, replaced by the constant low rush of a river somewhere far below, a sound you felt in your bones more than heard. We were picking our way along a narrow game trail, a ribbon of dirt pressed between two massive moss-covered boulders. I was in the lead, my eyes scanning the ground for footing. Hodgson was a few paces behind, and that's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a bear, a dark shape moving through the trees about 50 yards ahead, downslope from us. I froze, my hand going up to signal Hodgson to stop. He saw it too and went still. We both crouched, peering through the lattice of branches, but it wasn't a bear. It was walking upright. My brain refused to make sense of it for a second. It was like seeing a tree walk or a rock stand up and move. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, and powerfully built, with shoulders that were broad and heavy. Its entire body was covered in a coat of long, dark hair, a blackish brown that seemed to drink the light. It had no tail. I remember that detail so clearly because my mind, trying to find something familiar to latch onto, kept searching for one and found nothing. It was moving away from us, its back to us, walking with a slow, deliberate gait. It didn't shuffle or lope like an ape. It walked. Its arms were long, and they swung at its sides like a man's, but the sheer mass of them was wrong. The head was set forward on a thick neck, and it was large, bigger than any man's head. A coldness washed over me, a chill that started in my gut and spread out to my fingers and toes. This wasn't an animal. This wasn't anything I knew. The stories from my childhood, the old tales my grandmother would tell by the fire about the Rakshasas, the forest demons, they all came flooding back. This was one of them. It had to be. No creature of flesh and blood looked like that, moved like that. It was a thing of shadow and nightmare made real. I could hear Hodgson's breathing beside me, a sharp, ragged intake of air. He was a man of science, a man who categorized the world. He had no stories for this. I could feel the confusion and the dawning terror radiating from him. The creature stopped. It was partly obscured by a stand of saplings, but we could see its upper body. It turned its head, not its whole body, just its head, slowly, as if it had heard something. We were downwind, and we hadn't made a sound. It couldn't have smelled us or heard us. It was looking in our direction. I couldn't see its face clearly, just a dark patch beneath the heavy brow. But I felt its gaze. It was a physical pressure, a weight on my skin. My heart wasn't just beating fast, it was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. My mouth went completely dry. I couldn't have swallowed if I tried. My fingers were locked around the stock of my rifle, but the thought of raising it, of drawing its attention, was unthinkable. It would be like throwing a pebble at a god. It stood there completely still for what felt like an hour. The forest around us had gone utterly silent. The river's roar seemed to have vanished. There was no wind, no bird, no insect. It was as if the whole mountain was holding its breath, waiting to see what this thing would do. Then it made a sound. It wasn't a roar, it wasn't a growl. It was a low, guttural exhalation, a deep huff that carried through the still air with an unnatural clarity. It was a sound of pure, simple power, a sound that said, "I am here, this is my place." That sound broke the spell of frozen terror that held us. Hodgson gasped, a short, sharp noise that was almost a sob. I didn't think. There was no plan, no conscious decision. My body took over. A primal instinct, older than reason, screamed one command in every fiber of my being. "Run!" I turned and scrambled back up the path, my legs feeling like water, my boots slipping on the damp earth. I didn't look back to see if Hodgson was following. I just heard his frantic footsteps and his panicked breathing right behind me. We crashed through the undergrowth, no longer caring about stealth. Our only thought to put as much distance between us and that thing as possible. Branches whipped at my face and tore at my clothes. I fell once, skinning my palms on the rocky ground, and was back on my feet in an instant, driven by a fear so absolute it was like a fire in my veins. My lungs burned with the thin, cold air. I could hear the blood roaring in my ears, a sound almost as loud as the terror screaming in my head. We didn't stop until we burst out of the tree line, back onto the open ridge where we had started hours before. The sun was blinding. We collapsed, our bodies heaving, sweat and fear pouring off us. I finally dared to look back at the dark mouth of the forest. It was just trees, quiet, normal trees, but the shadows between them now seemed infinitely deep, hiding things I could never unsee. We didn't speak for a long time. There were no words. Hodgson's face was pale, his eyes wide with a shock that went deeper than anything I'd ever seen. He was a man who had just had his world broken. The walk back to his camp was a silent, haunted journey. Every rustle in the bushes made me jump. Every shadow felt like it was moving. The familiar mountains had become a foreign, menacing land. Later, over a fire he could barely sit still by, Hodgson started to talk. He was trying to piece it back together, to fit it into his world. He muttered about orangutans. He'd read descriptions, seen sketches. He said maybe one had wandered far from its home. He was grasping at straws, and I could hear the desperation in his voice. I didn't argue. What was the point? He could call it an orangutan if it made him sleep at night. I knew what I had seen. I knew what it was. He did end up writing about it. He sent a report to some society journal in Bengal. I saw a copy of it later. He wrote it like a scientist, all cool observation and speculation. He called it a possible orangutan. He wrote down the facts, the height, the hair, the upright gait. He wrote about the location and the date. But he didn't write about the silence. He didn't write about the way the air grew cold around it. He didn't write about the feeling of its gaze, a pressure that felt like a hand around my heart. He didn't write about the sound it made, a sound that didn't belong to any animal in any of his books. He didn't write about the pure, undiluted terror that emptied your mind of everything but the need to flee. He couldn't put that on paper, some things you can't capture with words. That was almost 200 years ago. I'm an old man now. I've lived a long life. I've faced snow leopards and charged by a wounded boar. I've known hunger and loss and joy. But nothing in all my years ever came close to the fear I felt on that day. The fear of something that shouldn't exist, something that looked at you and saw, I don't know what it saw, but in that moment, I felt like prey. I felt small. I felt like the world was a much bigger, much darker and much stranger place than I had ever imagined. And sometimes on a quiet night when the wind howls down from the high peaks, I can still hear that low, guttural huff, and I remember it all. Story 2. This was back when we were teenagers. All of our summers spent finding stupid ways to kill time. That particular night, we ended up down by the railroad bridge that crosses Darden Creek. It's one of those spots that feels a million miles from everything, even though you're technically still in town. The banks are all wooded and steep, with these high grassy levees on either side, and the creek itself is just a slow, muddy trickle most of the time. The bridge is an old iron and wood thing, the kind that rumbles for 5 minutes before a train even arrives. We'd been there for maybe an hour, just sitting on the massive railroad timbers, talking about nothing, listening to the crickets. The air was thick and warm, the kind of humid that makes your shirt stick to your back. It was fully dark, the only light coming from a sliver of moon and the distant orange glow of the streetlights from the neighborhoods up on the bluffs. We were used to the sounds down there, frogs, the creek, the occasional rustle in the leaves that was probably a raccoon or a possum. I was facing the woods on the north side of the tracks, and I saw a shadow detach itself from the deeper black under the trees. It was a quick, fluid movement, like someone stepping sideways behind a tree trunk. My first thought, my only logical thought, was that it was my friend. He'd gotten up to stretch his legs or something. I almost said his name, a joke about him being a spaz. But when I turned my head, he was still sitting right next to me on the timber, rolling a cigarette. "You see that?" I asked him, my voice low. "See what?" he mumbled, not looking up from his task. I just shook my head. "Nothing. Thought I saw something move over there." I pointed with my chin towards the tree line. He finally glanced over, squinting. "Probably a deer." "Yeah," I said, "probably." But it didn't move like a deer. It was taller, and the way it slid behind that tree was upright. I pushed the thought down. My eyes were playing tricks in the bad light. That had to be it. We sat in silence for another 10 minutes, the weird feeling from that movement still itching at the back of my neck. Then my friend slapped his thighs and stood up. "Gotta take a leak," he announced, and he hopped down from the bridge structure onto the gravel embankment. He walked a little ways down, towards the creek, to get some privacy behind a cluster of bushes. I stayed up on the timber, looking out over the creek. The peace of the night was gone for me. I was on edge, my senses cranked up too high. I could hear him shuffling around down there, the crunch of his shoes on the gravel, the sound of his zipper, and then another sound. It was a soft, scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged over dirt. It came from the other side of the tracks, from the deep shadow under the bridge where we never went because it was always full of cobwebs and smelled like damp rot. I held my breath, listening. The scraping stopped. Then it was replaced by a low, guttural breath. Not an animal panting. This was different, deeper, It was the sound of air moving through a huge chest. My heart started hammering against my ribs. "Dude," I whispered, but it was too quiet for him to hear. I was frozen, staring into that pool of blackness under the bridge. I couldn't see anything, just darkness, but I could feel something there. The air got heavier, like before a storm. That's when it happened, the thing I still see when I close my eyes. Over by the bridge's support, there was a stack of old, discarded railroad timbers. These things were massive, solid oak, soaked in creosote. They were waterlogged and probably weighed a couple 100 pounds each. You'd need 2 strong men and a crowbar to even budge one. One of them lifted into the air. It didn't roll or get pushed. It just rose, like it was weightless. It hovered about 3 feet off the ground, and silhouetted against the slightly less black sky, I saw a hand holding it, a huge, dark hand, with only 3 thick fingers wrapped around the end of the timber. My brain just broke. It couldn't process what it was seeing. The timber hung there for a second, and then it was tossed aside like it was a piece of firewood. It landed with a deafening wet thud on the muddy bank. The sound snapped me out of my paralysis. At the same exact moment, my friend let out a sharp, choked cry from down by the creek. I spun my head towards him. He was standing there, frozen, pants still unbuttoned, staring up at the bridge. And from under the bridge, an arm reached out towards him. It was impossibly long, covered in what looked like long, stringy, dark brown hair. It wasn't a bear's arm. It was wiry and muscular. And it ended in that same 3-fingered hand, reaching, fingers curling towards my friend like it was trying to grab him from 20 feet away. A smell hit me then, and it was so foul, so violently awful that I gagged. It was like a mix of rotting meat, wet dog, and something else. Something metallic, like old blood. The stench of rotting hair, thick and cloying, filled the air and seemed to coat the inside of my mouth. My friend and I made eye contact for a split second. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. There was no thought, no plan. A raw animal scream ripped from my throat, and at the same time he scrambled backwards, falling onto the gravel, then scrambling to his feet. We ran. I don't remember jumping down from the bridge. I just remember my feet hitting the gravel, and then the dirt path that led up the levee. We didn't look back. We just ran. The fear was a physical thing, a fire in my veins. My lungs burned and my legs felt like rubber, but I didn't dare slow down. The sound of our frantic footfalls and ragged breathing was the only thing in my ears. Halfway up the levee, a scream tore through the night behind us. It wasn't human. It wasn't an animal I'd ever heard. It was a high, piercing shriek that dropped into a guttural, snarling roar. It sounded like a panther, if a panther was the size of a truck and was being tortured. The sound felt like it vibrated in my teeth. It was a sound of pure rage. That sound gave us a fresh burst of adrenaline. We crested the levee and pounded across the open field towards the distant lights of the houses. We didn't stop until we slammed through my friend's back door, collapsing on the kitchen floor, gasping for air, our bodies trembling so hard we could barely stand. We tried to tell his parents what happened, but the words came out in a jumbled, hysterical mess. Under the bridge, a hand, it threw a timber, the smell. They thought we were on drugs or had just spooked ourselves silly. They made us hot chocolate and told us to go to bed. But sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that 3-fingered hand and that long, hairy arm reaching out of the darkness. That was just the beginning. That night opened a door, and whatever was on the other side knew we were there. A few weeks later, we were stupid enough to go back during the day with a couple of other friends. We wanted proof, I guess, to prove to ourselves we weren't crazy. We went down to the creek bed, right near where my friend had been standing. The ground was still soft from a recent rain, and there they were. Footprints, but they weren't bear tracks. They were huge bipedal prints, deep impressions in the mud, and next to them, pressed clearly into the soft earth, was a perfect handprint. It was massive, wider than my two hands put together, and it only had 3 fingers and a thumb that was set low, almost like an afterthought. The fingers were long and thick. We just stared at it. Nobody said anything. The reality of it, right there in the bright light of day, was somehow more terrifying than the night had been. The encounters didn't stop. Another time, a group of us were in the woods, not far from the bridge, just messing around, when that same rotting smell washed over us. We all froze. Then, from a thicket about 50 yards away, we saw it. It stood up. It was huge, 8 or 9 feet tall at least, with impossibly wide shoulders and arms that hung down past its knees. It was covered in that same long, dark brown hair. It didn't look at us. It just took a step towards a dead, skeletal tree that was leaning against a live one. It put one of those 3-fingered hands on the trunk and just pushed. The tree, which was probably a foot in diameter, snapped at the base and crashed to the ground with a sound like a gunshot. Then it turned its head, and even from that distance I felt it looking right at me. We ran again. We always ran. It was violent. It was aggressive. It wasn't some shy, curious animal. It felt malicious. The screaming, the tree, the way it reached for my friend. It wanted us to be afraid. The years passed. I grew up, moved away for a while, got a job. I tried to bury those memories, to rationalize them away as a shared teenage hallucination, but I could never quite shake the feeling, the visceral memory of that smell and that sound. Then, just a few years ago, I was back in St. Petersburg, visiting family. For some reason I still don't understand, I felt this pull to go back to that spot by Darden Creek. It was a bright, sunny afternoon. The place had changed a little, but the bridge was the same. The woods were the same. I walked down the path, my heart thumping in a nervous rhythm. I went to the creek bed, to the same general area where we'd found the prints all those years ago. The ground was damp. I wasn't even really looking for anything. It was just a morbid curiosity. And then I saw it, a single fresh footprint in the mud by the water's edge. It was huge. And right next to it, clear as day, was a 3-fingered handprint, as if whatever made it had knelt down to drink from the creek. The chill that went through me was so deep, so absolute, it felt like my blood had turned to ice. It wasn't a memory, it wasn't a story from my youth. It was here, now. It had never left. I didn't run this time. I just stood there, staring at that print, the reality of it sinking into my bones. All those years, I'd carried this thing with me, this secret horror, and in that moment, it was confirmed. It was real. I turned around and walked away slowly, my whole body numb. I got in my car and I drove, and I've never been back. I still don't know what it was. I don't use its popular name because that feels too simple, too clean for what we experienced. It was something else. Something that lives in the shadows of places we think we know. Something that smells like death and has only 3 fingers. And I know, with a certainty that keeps me up some nights, that it's still out there. Story 3. Okay, I'll just start typing. I don't really know how to talk about this even now, but I've been reading this forum for a while, and I guess it's time. My name's Mark. This happened to me in July of last year, 2021. I lived, in a cabin I built myself on the edge of the Willamette Valley, near Sweet Home, Oregon. It's quiet out there, the kind of quiet you can feel in your bones. I liked it that way. I'm a quiet guy. I like my own company, my dog's company. That was it. It was enough. That particular day, a Tuesday, had been completely normal, just a routine day. I remember it was hot, the kind of hot that makes the air over the gravel driveways shimmer. I'd spent the afternoon splitting firewood for the coming winter, the kind of job that leaves your hands raw and your shirt soaked through with sweat. My dog Buddy, a shepherd mix with one flopped ear, had lain in the shade of the porch, panting, watching me work. I remember the smell of pine sap and dry dirt, the sound of the axe thudding into the rounds of fur. After I'd stacked the wood, I'd grilled a couple of burgers for dinner, shared a bit with Buddy, and we'd just sat on the porch as the sun went down. The sky turned this deep orange, then purple, and the tree line became a solid black wall. The crickets started up and the frogs from the creek down the hill. It was peaceful. I felt good. Tired in that satisfied way you get from a hard day's physical work. I went to bed around 10, I guess. The cabin is just one room, basically, with a sleeping loft upstairs. I climbed the ladder. Buddy thumped up behind me and circled a few times on his rug at the foot of my bed before settling down with a heavy sigh. The window was open, just a screen between me and the night. I remember lying there, listening to the absolute nothing. No cars, no people, just the faint hoot of an owl way off in the distance. I fell asleep pretty quick. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. The room was pitch black, the kind of dark you only get miles from any town, but I wasn't awake because of a noise. Not at first. It was more of a feeling, a vibration, a deep, rhythmic thump, 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 coming from directly above me, from the roof. My eyes snapped open and I just lay there, frozen, trying to make sense of it. My first groggy thought was a branch, but there are no big trees that close to the cabin. I'd cleared them all back when I built the place, and this wasn't a branch scraping. This was a weight, a massive, impossible weight. Each thump was slow, deliberate, and it made the whole cabin shudder. I could feel it through the mattress. The wooden rafters overhead let out this low, groaning creak with every step, a sound of protest I'd never heard from them before, not even in the worst winter storms. My heart wasn't just beating fast. It was slamming against my ribs, a frantic, panicked drum. Buddy was already up. I heard the low, guttural rumble in his chest before I even saw him. He was standing stiff-legged, staring straight up at the ceiling, his lips pulled back from his teeth. That wasn't his usual bark for a raccoon or a deer. This was different. This was a pure, primal warning, a sound I'd never heard him make before. His hackles were up so high he looked like a different dog, his back a rigid ridge of fur. Thump, thump. The steps moved from directly over my head, across the peak of the roof, towards the edge above the porch. They were heavy, so damn heavy. It sounded like someone was dropping bags of concrete on my roof. I sat up, the movement feeling clumsy and too loud. My mouth was dry as dust. The ladder down to the main room felt a mile away. I slid out of bed, my bare feet cold on the wooden floorboards. My shotgun was in the cabinet downstairs. I always kept it loaded just in case of coyotes getting too bold. I crept down the ladder trying to be silent, but every shift of my weight, every creak of the wood under my feet felt like a gunshot in the quiet. Buddy stayed up in the loft, his growl now a continuous vibrating snarl. I got to the cabinet, my hands shaking so bad I fumbled with the simple latch. I finally got it open, and my fingers closed around the cool, familiar metal of the shotgun. I grabbed my big Maglite flashlight from the countertop. The thumping had stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. It was a thick, waiting silence. I stood there in the dark main room, holding the gun and the light, listening so hard my ears started to ring. I could hear my own blood pulsing in my head. I couldn't just stand there. I had to know. I had to see what the hell had been on my roof. I unlocked the deadbolt on the front door, the click echoing in the stillness. I pulled the door open just a crack, the humid night air washing over me. It was warm and still. The crickets and frogs had gone completely silent. That's when the fear really set in, a cold knot in my gut. The forest is never that quiet. Something had shut it all down. I stepped out onto the porch, the rough, weathered boards familiar under my bare feet. I raised the flashlight, my thumb hovering over the switch, and swept the beam across the yard. Nothing. Just the dark shapes of the trees, my truck, the woodpile. Everything was still. I was starting to think maybe I dreamed it, that the thumps were just some weird sleep thing when I heard it, a sound from above me, from the roof. It was a deep, rumbling growl. It wasn't high-pitched like a cat's or a snarl like a dog's. This was lower. It was a vibration I felt in my chest, more than I heard with my ears, like the lowest note from a giant cello. A sound that seemed to come from something with lungs the size of kegs. It was followed by a slow, deliberate scraping noise. Scrape, drag, scrape. Claws, long, thick claws dragging across the asphalt shingles of my roof. I froze. My whole body locked up. I couldn't even breathe. I was pointing the flashlight straight up, but I was too scared to turn it on. I just stood there, listening to that horrible scraping sound move along the edge of the roof, right above where I was standing. I could smell something now, too, something that cut through the clean scent of pine. It was a smell, thick and musky like wet dog, but mixed with something else, something rotten, like old meat and bog water. It was overwhelming. Then everything happened at once. There was a shift in weight, a sound of splintering wood from the gutter. The scraping stopped, and then it jumped. The sound it made hitting the ground was a massive, concussive thud that I felt through the soles of my feet. It wasn't a graceful landing. It was the sound of a huge weight dropping from a height and hitting the earth with immense force. The ground literally shook. My porch light, a motion-activated one, flicked on. In that sudden, harsh yellow light, I saw it. It was just a glimpse, a fraction of a second, burned into my brain forever. It was tall, maybe 7, 8 feet, and it was upright on 2 legs. It was covered in dark, matted hair, black or dark brown, that was shaggy and caked with mud. Its shoulders were unbelievably broad, sloping down to massive arms that swung as it moved. It didn't run like a man. It was a powerful, loping stride, but it was fast, so damn fast. It was heading for the tree line, and it didn't look back. I stood there, paralyzed, for what felt like an hour. The porch light timed out and clicked off, plunging me back into darkness. I finally managed to raise a trembling hand and click on my maglite. The beam swept across the empty yard, then down to the ground at the edge of the porch. There, in the soft, damp soil of my flower bed, was a single footprint. It was huge. I'm 6 feet tall and my boots aren't small, but this print was easily half again as long as my foot and twice as wide. It was deeply impressed into the ground, the details sharp. I could see the outline of a heel, a broad arch, and 5 distinct toe prints. Not claws, like a bear, but toes. Almost human, but not quite. They were splayed out, and the whole thing was just massive. My brain was screaming, bear. It has to be a bear. But I've seen bear tracks my whole life. They don't walk on 2 legs. They don't leave prints like this. I backed into the cabin, slammed the door, and threw the deadbolt. I spent the rest of the night sitting in a chair at the kitchen table, the shotgun across my lap, the maglite in my hand, pointed at the door. Buddy stayed pressed against my legs, shivering, letting out a low whine every now and then. I didn't sleep. I just listened. I heard nothing else. The forest stayed silent until the first bird started chirping just before dawn. When the sun finally came up, proper daylight flooding the valley, I felt like I could breathe again. It felt stupid almost in the bright morning light. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it was a bear that had gotten up on its hind legs in a weird way. I had to go look. I went outside, the shotgun still in my hand, just in case. The first thing I saw was the gutter on the corner of the porch roof. It was made of aluminum, and it was bent downwards, crushed and twisted, like something incredibly heavy had used it as a step or grabbed onto it. There were long, deep scratches in the paint. Further up on the roof itself, I could see from the ground that several shingles were torn, their edges ripped up. Then I went to the spot where it had landed. The ground was torn up. There was a deep bowl-shaped depression where its feet had hit, and leading away from it towards the trees was a line of footprints. Each one was a perfect copy of the one I'd seen last night. I got a tape measure from my workshop, 17 inches long. from the heel to the tip of the big toe. The stride, the distance between one print and the next, was 4 feet, a casual walking pace for something that tall. I felt cold all over again. My neighbor Ron is a logger. He's lived in these woods his whole life. He's a big, no-nonsense guy who's seen everything. I called him, my voice still shaky. He came over in his truck, sipping his morning coffee. He got out, took one look at the footprints, and his whole demeanor changed. The casual smile vanished. He knelt down, not touching anything, just looking. "That ain't no bear, Mark," he said, his voice low and serious. He pointed at the stride. "A bear can't walk like that. And look at the toes." He shook his head. "I don't know what the hell that is, but it's no bear." That was it for me. Ron's confirmation made it real. This wasn't in my head. The following weeks were hell. I tried to stay. I'm a stubborn guy. But the fear was a constant companion, a cold stone in my stomach. I installed more motion lights. One night, around 2 in the morning, they all blazed on at once. I looked out the window, and there it was, or the shape of it. It was standing at the very edge of the tree line, maybe 50 yards away, just standing there, silhouetted by the lights. It was huge, and it was just watching the cabin. It stood there for a full minute before it turned and melted back into the shadows. Another night, I heard it. Not on the roof, but out in the woods, a rhythmic knocking sound like it was hitting a tree with a big stick. Knock, knock, knock. Then a pause. Then again. It went on for hours, a terrifying, deliberate signal I couldn't understand. I couldn't take it anymore. The lack of sleep, the constant jumping at every sound, terror. I packed a bag, loaded Buddy into the truck, and I drove to my sister's place in town. I haven't spent a single night in that cabin since. Later, I got in touch with a guy, an investigator who documents this kind of thing. He came out, took casts of the footprints, photos of the roof and the gutter. He agreed it was compelling evidence. But what does that even mean? It doesn't change anything. I sold the cabin. I couldn't keep up the payments living in town anyway. I live in a small apartment now. I keep a loaded shotgun by my bed, which is stupid in a second-story apartment in a suburb, but I do it anyway. I still can't sleep with an open window, and sometimes, on a quiet night, if the wind is just right, I'll hear it, or I think I do. A faint, rhythmic thumping, way off in the distance, and my blood just runs cold. I'll never forget the weight of those steps, the smell, or the sight of that thing vanishing into the trees. I don't know what it was. I just know it was real, and it knew where I lived. And some nights, I still lie awake, listening. Story 4. I remember that day like it was yesterday, even though it happened more years ago than I care to count. The air had that particular Pacific Northwest chill to it, the kind that seeps right through your wool coat and settles deep in your bones. It was early autumn, I reckon. The leaves had just started turning, but the real cold hadn't set in yet. I'd been out since before dawn, my breath making little clouds in the dim morning light. My rifle felt familiar and heavy in my hands, the wood stock smooth from years of use. See, I worked for the Hudson's Bay Company back then, trading furs and supplies with the local tribes and trappers. The wilderness around Mount St. Helens was my territory, and I knew those woods better than I knew the streets of any town. That morning, I'd headed out from my cabin to hunt some fresh meat. We'd been running low on provisions, and the company post was still 2 days' ride away. Better to hunt than go hungry. The forest was quiet that day, quieter than usual. Not the peaceful quiet of a calm morning, but that heavy, waiting silence that sometimes settles over the woods, like everything was holding its breath. I remember noticing how the birds had gone still, how even the squirrels weren't chattering in the trees. I shrugged it off at first, thinking maybe a storm was coming in, though the sky looked clear enough through the canopy. I'd been following a deer trail for about an hour, my eyes scanning the ground for tracks. When I first caught the smell, it hit me all at once. This musky, thick odor like wet dog and rotten meat mixed together, strong enough to make my eyes water. I stopped right there in the middle of the trail, my grip tightening on my rifle. I'd spent enough time in the wilderness to know most animal smells, but this was different. This was something I'd never encountered before. For a minute, I just stood there, listening. The woods had gone completely silent now, not even the sound of insects buzzing. My heart started beating a little faster, that primal instinct telling me something wasn't right. I remember thinking maybe it was a bear, a big one, maybe wounded. That would explain the smell and the silence. Bears have a way of clearing out an area when they're around. I pushed forward, moving slower now, more careful. My boots made soft crunching sounds on the fallen leaves, and each step seemed too loud in that unnatural quiet. The smell kept getting stronger, hanging in the air like a foul mist. I remember my palms getting sweaty against the rifle stock, my mouth going dry. I've faced grizzlies before, been charged by moose, even had a close call with a mountain lion once, but this felt different. This felt wrong. The trail started leading uphill toward a rocky outcrop covered in thick ferns and young hemlocks. The sunlight barely reached the forest floor here, everything cast in deep shadows despite it being mid-morning. That's when I saw the first broken branches, thick ones, snapped clean off about 7 feet up, not the kind of damage a deer would make. I stopped again, my eyes tracing the path of destruction leading deeper into the woods. Something big had moved through here, and recently. I followed the trail of broken branches, my rifle now at the ready. The smell was overwhelming here, so thick I could almost taste it. My stomach was in knots, that nervous feeling you get when you know you're not alone out there. I remember thinking I should turn back, that whatever had made this path was too big to mess with, but curiosity pushed me forward. Stupid, I know now. Should have trusted my gut and gotten out of there. After maybe another 100 yards, the trees started thinning out, opening into a small clearing surrounded by tall firs, and that's when I saw it. At first, my mind couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. I thought maybe it was a bear standing on its hind legs, but bears don't stand that straight, and they're not that tall. This thing was massive, must have been 8 feet tall if it was an inch, covered in dark, matted hair that looked almost black in the shadowy light. It was broad across the shoulders, with arms that hung down past its knees. Its head was cone-shaped, sitting low between massive shoulders. But here's the thing that still haunts me. It wasn't just standing there. It was watching me. I could feel its eyes on me even from across the clearing, and its eyes, they weren't animal eyes. They were intelligent, aware. They held a knowing that froze the blood in my veins. We stood like that for what felt like forever. Me at the edge of the clearing. It may be 30 yards away. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My rifle felt useless in my hands. This wasn't some dumb beast. This thing was studying me, same as I was studying it. I could see its chest moving as it breathed, see the way its head tilted slightly, like it was puzzling me out. Then it moved. Not toward me, thank God. It raised its right arm, slow and deliberate, and made this gesture with its hand. It curled its fingers back toward itself, like it was telling me to come closer, a beckoning motion, clear as day. Human-like, but not human. The movement was smooth, purposeful, not the clumsy gesture of an ape or bear, but something with intention behind it. That's when the real terror hit me. This wasn't just some animal I'd stumbled upon. This thing had intelligence. It was communicating, and the way it looked at me, it wasn't a friendly invitation. There was something in its eyes, something ancient and menacing, a coldness that went right through me. My body started moving before my mind caught up. I turned and ran. Not a careful retreat, not a tactical withdrawal. I flat out ran like hell was at my heels. I crashed through underbrush, branches whipping at my face and arms. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. Didn't care about anything except putting distance between me and that thing. I could hear it behind me, not chasing, but moving. Heavy footsteps crunching through the forest, keeping pace with me. The sound was awful, like trees being shoved aside. I didn't look back, couldn't look back. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. My lungs burned with each breath, the cold air tearing at my throat. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing against a fallen log. I lay there gasping, my whole body shaking. The forest had gone quiet again. No footsteps, no movement, just my own ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart in my ears. When I finally got my breath back, I realized I'd dropped my rifle somewhere during my flight. Didn't matter, I wasn't going back for it. I got to my feet, my muscles screaming in protest, and started moving again, slower now, but with no less urgency. I needed to get home. The rest of that day is a blur of fear and exhaustion. I walked for hours, my mind replaying that moment over and over. The creature's eyes, its gesture, the intelligence behind it. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. I jumped at my own shadow, my nerves completely shot. It was nearly dark when I finally reached my cabin. I remember stumbling through the door, my clothes torn, my face scratched and bleeding from branches. I barred the door behind me and sat there in the dark, listening. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind made me jump. I didn't sleep that night, just sat there with my back against the door, waiting for sunrise. The next morning, in the clear light of day, part of me wanted to believe I'd imagined it all. Maybe it was a bear. Maybe I'd been tired. Maybe the shadows had played tricks on me. But I knew better. I knew what I'd seen. That creature was real, and it had looked at me with knowing eyes. It had beckoned to me. I never went back to that area again. Told the company I was sick, made excuses. Eventually I moved further east, away from those deep woods. But I never forgot. Years later I told my daughter Agnes about what I'd seen. She was the only one I ever told the whole story to. People would have thought me mad, but she believed me, listened to every word with wide eyes. I'm an old man now, my trapping days long behind me. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right through the pines, I catch a whiff of that same musky smell, and the fear comes rushing back. That creature is still out there in those deep woods, I've no doubt. And sometimes in my dreams, I see its arm raising, those long fingers curling back, beckoning me to come closer. I always wake up sweating, my heart hammering against my ribs. That's the truth of it. That's what happened to me out there near Mount St. Helens. Helens all those years ago. I don't know what that thing was, but it was no bear, no ape from some zoo. It was something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist in this world. And the way it looked at me, the way it gestured, that stays with you, that changes you. I've never been the same since that day, and I don't suppose I ever will be. Story 5. The canyon was beautiful back then, real wilderness. Not like some of the places you see now. We'd set up our tent right beside a creek. It wasn't a little stream. This was a proper creek, wide enough and with enough water that you could hear it gurgling all the time. The sound was usually a comfort. Our tent was one of those big, heavy canvas ones, the kind with a thick vinyl floor. An adult could stand up in the middle of it, no problem. We'd spent the afternoon fishing in the creek, and my dad had made a fire. It was a perfect summer day, the kind that makes you feel like nothing bad could ever happen. The sky started to change in the late afternoon. The blue went away, replaced by this bruised purple-gray color. You could feel the air get heavy, like it was pressing down on you. My dad said a storm was coming, but we were tough. We'd camped in rain before. We made sure everything was secure, tied the tent down a little better, and got ready to wait it out. When the storm hit, it wasn't like any storm I'd ever been in. The thunder didn't just rumble. it cracked right above us, so loud it felt like it was inside my skull. The lightning wasn't off in the distance. It was instantaneous. These blinding white flashes that turned the whole world silver for a split second and then plunged it back into a deeper, blacker dark. We were all huddled in the tent, my mum trying to act calm for us kids, telling us it was just a little thunder and lightning. And then the smell hit. It's the first thing I always remember, even before the sounds. It came out of nowhere, this wave of stench that was so thick you could almost taste it. It was like rotten meat, but mixed with something else, something wet and animal, like a dog that had been swimming in a swamp and then rolled in something dead. It was so powerful it made my eyes water instantly. My youngest sister started coughing. My mom whispered, "What is that?" But none of us had an answer. The smell just sat in the air, clinging to everything, filling up the tent. We could even smell it over the clean, wet scent of the rain. We were all quiet for a minute, just listening to the storm and trying not to breathe too deep. And that's when we heard it. At first, it was just a sound under the noise of the rain and thunder, a heavy, crunching sound, like someone was walking through the brush, but not carefully. It was a purposeful, crashing sort of walk. Step, crunch, step, crunch. It was coming from the other side of the creek, getting closer. My dad sat up straight. He held a hand up, telling us all to be quiet. His face was tight. Then the sounds changed. They weren't just footsteps anymore. It was a low, guttural noise. Not a growl, not a roar. It was like a yell that came from the bottom of a barrel, a deep, chesty scream that I could feel more than I could hear. It vibrated in my own chest. It was the most primitive, angry sound I've ever heard. It wasn't an animal I knew. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a coyote. It was something else. The footsteps got closer, and we realized they were heading for the creek. We heard a huge splash, like a boulder had been dropped in the water. Whatever it was, it had crossed the creek. It was on our side now. The screaming got louder, more intense. It was right outside the tent. I remember pressing myself into the floor of the tent, the cold vinyl against my cheek. I was shaking so hard I thought my bones would come apart. My sisters were crying, but silently, just these little hitching sobs. My mum had her arms around all of us. My dad and my older brother were just staring at the tent wall, their faces white in the flashes of lightning. Then it stopped. Right beside the tent. I mean, it was so close I felt like if I reached out, I could have touched the canvas and felt its heat. The screaming stopped, and for a second, there was just the rain. Then we heard breathing. It was a heavy, wet, snuffling sound, like a giant animal sniffing the air, trying to find us. The smell was unbearable now, like it was being pumped directly into the tent. The next lightning flash came. It wasn't like in the movies where you see the whole creature. It was just a shadow. But it was a shadow cast on our tent. The tent wall lit up bright white for that instant, and we saw the silhouette of something massive. It was towering over us. It had to be at least 9 feet tall. The shape was human-like, but all wrong. Its arms were incredibly long, hanging down past its knees, and they were huge, thick. Its head was big and sort of peaked, and it was covered in what looked like long, shaggy hair. The shadow of its arms was cast over the roof of the tent, like it was reaching over us. The flash ended, and we were in darkness again. But that image was burned into my eyes. We all saw it. Nobody said a word. We just knew. There was something standing right next to our tent, something huge and not human. The screaming started again, but this time it was deafening. It was right there, just on the other side of the thin canvas wall. The sound was so loud it felt like it was shaking the tent poles. It was a roar of pure rage, a sound that said it knew we were in here, and it wanted us to know it was out there. That's when my dad made his decision. I saw his face set into this hard, grim mask. He believed it was a bear, a big, aggressive bear. That was the only thing that made sense to him. He whispered to my mum, "I have to scare it off. It might tear the tent apart." My mum grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with terror, but he shook his head. He had to protect his family. It was the most terrifying moment of my life, watching him unzip the tent flap. The sound of the zipper was so small and pathetic against that roaring. He slipped out into the storm, and my mom quickly zipped the flap shut behind him. We were alone in the tent. The screaming had stopped the second the zipper sounded. Now it was quiet, just the rain. We held our breath, listening. We heard scuffling. Not a fight, exactly. It was the sound of feet moving in the wet dirt and pine needles. Then we heard a low, rumbling growl. It wasn't the screaming from before. This was different, more menacing, more conversational. It was a sound of warning. Then we heard my dad's voice. He wasn't yelling. He was talking, his voice low and steady, but I could hear the tremor in it. I couldn't make out the words, just the tone. He was trying to sound big, trying to sound like he wasn't afraid. There was another growl, closer this time. Then a sound I'll never forget, a sharp, loud thwack, like a heavy branch being smacked against a tree trunk. It was so hard it echoed. Then silence, just the rain. My mom had her hand over her mouth, her knuckles white. We didn't hear anything for what felt like an hour. It was probably only a minute or two. Then we heard the scuffling again, and the tent flap zipper started to move. My mom unzipped it just enough, and my dad practically fell back inside. He was soaked, covered in mud, but that wasn't the worst of it. His face, it was a color I'd never seen on a living person. It was a pale, sickly gray. His eyes were wide, staring at nothing. He was breathing in short, ragged gasps. He didn't look at any of us. He just turned, sat down with his back against the tent wall right by the zippered entrance, and pulled his knees up to his chest. He put his head in his hands. My mom whispered his name, but he didn't respond. He just sat there, shaking. He wouldn't speak. He wouldn't tell us what happened. We asked him, "Dad, what was it?" "Did you see it?" He just shook his head, a tiny, frantic movement. He wouldn't look at us. The rest of the night was the longest of my life. The storm eventually passed. The smell faded away. We didn't hear any more footsteps or screams, but my dad didn't move from his spot by the door. He just sat there, a silent sentinel, staring into the dark corner of the tent. We were all too scared to sleep. We just huddled together, watching him, waiting for the sun. The second the first hint of gray light touched the sky, my dad moved. He stood up, his movements stiff. His color was still bad. He didn't say a word. He just started packing. He was frantic about it, stuffing our sleeping bags into their sacks, collapsing the tent poles with clumsy, shaking hands. We all helped, not talking, just moving as fast as we could. We threw everything into the back of the station wagon, not caring how it was packed. My dad kept looking over his shoulder into the woods, his eyes scanning the trees. We drove out of that canyon as the sun was coming up. Nobody said a word the whole way home. The ride was completely silent. The mood in the car was heavy, suffocating. We never went camping again as a family, not ever. My dad never, ever talked about that night. If anyone brought it up, he'd just get quiet and leave the room. It was like a door had been slammed shut and locked inside him. The subject was closed. Years and years went by. I grew up, had kids of my own, grandkids. My dad passed away. It was my granddaughter. She was doing a school project on local legends, and she asked me if I'd ever heard of Bigfoot in Utah. I got that old, cold feeling in my stomach. I told her a little bit about our camping trip, about the smell and the sounds. She got really excited and said, "Grandpa told me, right before he died, he told me." I was stunned. "He told you what?" She said, "I asked him if he believed in Bigfoot. He got really quiet, and then he said, 'I don't have to believe. I confronted one once.' That's all he said. He wouldn't tell me any more. That was it. That was the only confirmation we ever got. He never told anyone the full story. He took the details of what he saw when he stepped out of that tent to his grave. My mom is gone now. One of my sisters is gone. It's just me and my other sister and my brother left. And when we talk about it, which is almost never, we still get that same cold fear in our guts. I don't know what it was. People say Bigfoot, and I guess that's as good a name as any. But I know what we experienced. I know the smell that made our eyes water. I know the sound that vibrated in our chests. I know the shadow of that enormous, hairy thing stretching over our tent in the lightning flash. And I know the look on my dad's face when he came back inside. A look that said he had seen something that should not exist in this world. He saw something that stripped away all his understanding of how things are, and he could never get it back, and in a way, neither could we. Story 6. Okay, so I've never really talked about this before, not in full detail anyway. It's one of those things that stuck with me, buried deep, but every now and then it bubbles up and I can't shake it. This happened back in June of 1964. And I was just a kid then, maybe 18 or 19, hanging out with a bunch of other guys from around Hampton County, South Carolina. We were all young, dumb, and full of that invincible feeling you get when you're that age. Life was simple, and camping trips were our escape. Just a bunch of friends, a fire, and the woods. That particular night, we'd set up camp in a spot we'd been to before, deep in the woods off one of the old logging roads. It was a clear night, warm but not sticky, with a sky full of stars because there was no moon to speak of. We'd built a big campfire, the kind that throws heat and light for yards around, and we were just lounging on logs and blankets, passing around a bottle of cheap whiskey and laughing about nothing important. The air smelled like pine and smoke, and everything felt peaceful, the way only a summer night in the woods can. I remember sitting there, feeling the heat from the fire on my face, listening to the crackle of the flames and the guys joking around. One of them was strumming a guitar badly, and another was telling some tall tale about a girl he'd met. It was all normal, the kind of night you look back on and smile about. But then things started to change. It began with the sounds. At first, it was just a faint rustling in the trees beyond the firelight. Something I brushed off as a deer or maybe a raccoon. We were used to wildlife. It was part of camping. But then the rustling got louder, turning into these heavy, crashing noises, like something big was moving through the underbrush. Not running, but stomping, deliberate and slow. I remember feeling a prickle on the back of my neck, the kind you get when you know you're not alone. The guys fell quiet, one by one, the guitar stopping mid-chord. We all looked at each other, and I could see the same unease in their eyes. "What the hell is that?" one of them whispered, and his voice was tight, like he was trying not to scare himself. We all strained to listen, and the crashing got closer, maybe 50 yards out, then 30. It wasn't the sound of an animal running away. It was coming toward us, steady and relentless. The firelight only reached so far, and beyond that, the woods were pitch black, the kind of dark that feels like a wall. I remember my heart starting to beat faster, a dull thump in my chest, and I could feel the sweat gathering on my palms. We were all on edge, joking forgotten, now just staring into the darkness. Then something snapped a branch loud like a gunshot, and we all jumped. That's when I saw it. Or rather, when we all saw it. Emerging from the trees, right at the edge of the firelight, was this figure. At first, my brain couldn't make sense of it. It was tall, way taller than a man, and covered in dark, matted hair that looked almost black in the flickering light. It stood on two legs, but it was hunched over, with arms that hung down past its knees. I couldn't see its face clearly, but I got the impression of something primal and wild, with eyes that seemed to reflect the fire like an animal's. For a second, nobody moved. We were frozen, just staring, and I felt this cold dread wash over me. It wasn't fear like when you see a snake or a bear. It was deeper, a gut-level terror that told me this thing wasn't supposed to be here, wasn't supposed to exist. Then it took a step forward, and that's when the panic hit. One of the guys let out a choked scream, and that broke the spell. We all scrambled up at once, knocking over logs and sending embers flying. I don't think anyone said a word. We just ran, bolting into the woods away from the creature, toward where we'd parked the truck a half-mile or so down the trail. Running through those woods in the dark was a nightmare. Branches whipped at my face and arms, and I could hear the others crashing along beside me, all of us breathing in ragged gasps. Behind us, the crashing sound started up again, louder and faster now, like whatever it was had decided to give chase. I didn't look back. I was too scared, but I could feel it gaining ground, the sounds getting closer, and I swear I could hear heavy breathing that wasn't ours. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst, and my legs felt like jelly, but adrenaline kept me going. I remember tripping over a root and skinning my knee, but I didn't stop. Just scrambled up and kept running, driven by pure fear. The whole time my mind was racing. What was that thing, a bear? But bears don't walk upright like that, not for long. And this was too tall, too human-like in its posture. Bigfoot, I'd heard stories, but I never believed them, not until that moment. All I knew was that I had to get out of there, and so did the others. We finally burst out of the trees onto the dirt road where we'd left the truck, and I've never been so relieved to see that old beat-up vehicle. We piled in, fumbling with the doors, and one of the guys got the engine started with a roar. As we sped away, I glanced back, and I could still see the glow of our campfire in the distance, but now there was something moving around it, a dark shape that made my blood run cold. We didn't talk much on the drive back. Everyone was shaking, and one guy was crying softly, which made it all feel more real. When we got to my place, we just sat in the truck for a minute, catching our breath, and then we went our separate ways with mumbled goodbyes. I went inside and straight to my room, but I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing stepping out of the shadows, and I'd jolt awake, heart racing. The fear didn't fade. It just settled into a low hum of unease that stayed with me for days. We never saw the creature again after that, and we didn't go back to the woods for a long time. But the memory of it, the sheer terror of that night, has never left me. Even now, all these years later, I can still feel that primal fear, and I know that whatever we encountered out there was real, and it was something I'll never be able to explain. Story 7. It was one of those late September days where the air starts to get that crisp bite to it, the kind that makes you glad you packed a good jacket. Bow season had just opened, and like I do every year, I'd taken a few days off work to get out into the woods. My plan was simple. Drive the network of old logging roads in the Yakima Valley, find a nice, secluded spot to set up a base camp, and spend the next few days seeing if I could get close to an elk. I'd been on the road for a couple of hours, my truck loaded down with gear. The main highway was miles behind me now. I was deep into it, on this gravel track called 1502. It's not even really a road, more like a suggestion of one, winding its way through these dry, pine-covered hills. The dust from my tires hung in the air behind me like a brown ghost, coating the dry ferns and scrub oak lining the road. I had my window down, my elbow resting on the sill, just listening to the crunch of the gravel under my tires and the quiet hum of the forest. It was that peaceful golden hour light, the sun sitting low and heavy in the sky, painting everything in long, deep shadows. I was just scanning the woods to my right, looking for a game trail or a flat spot big enough for my small tent when I happened to glance up into my rearview mirror. It was just a habit, a quick check, and that's when I saw it. My brain didn't process it right away. It was like looking at one of those magic eye pictures. For a second, it was just shapes and shadows in the dust-clouded road behind me. Then the pieces snapped together, and my heart just dropped into my stomach. There was a figure in the road, a big one, upright. It had just stepped out from the tree line on the right-hand side and was now standing right in the middle of the gravel track, maybe 150 yards back. I remember my first thought wasn't even fear, it was just pure, stupid confusion. What the hell is another person doing out here? This road went nowhere. I hadn't seen another vehicle or even a fresh tire track all afternoon. But as I stared into that little rectangular mirror, the confusion curdled into something else, something cold and sharp that started pricking at the base of my spine. This wasn't a person. The proportions were all wrong. It was huge, I mean massively built. It had these incredibly broad, rounded shoulders that sloped down into long, thick arms. And the arms, this is the detail that really got me. They hung down so far. They weren't like a man's arms. They hung easily to its mid-thigh, just swinging there, loose and heavy. It was dark in color, a deep brownish black, like wet bark or old leather, and it seemed to absorb the fading light. It was just standing there, facing the direction I was driving, away from me. It was so still, unnaturally still. I've seen bears stand on their hind legs, and there's always a wobble, a shift in weight. This thing was solid as a statue. My foot instinctively came off the gas. The truck slowed, the engine grumbling in a lower gear. The rational part of my brain, the part that was screaming at me, was trying to find a safe place to pull over. I needed to stop. I needed to turn around. I needed to get a better look, to prove to myself that I was just seeing things, that it was a trick of the light and a weirdly shaped tree stump. But there was no safe place. The road was narrow, barely wide enough for one vehicle, with a steep, rocky bank rising up on my left and a ditch falling away into thick brush on my right. If I stopped in the road, I'd be blocking it. Not that anyone else was coming, but stopping felt wrong. It felt like a bad idea, so I just kept rolling forward, slower and slower, my eyes glued to that rearview mirror. The figure just stood there, a dark sentinel in the middle of my dusty wake. I could feel my pulse thumping in my neck, a hard, rapid rhythm. My hands were clenched tight on the steering wheel, the plastic creaking under my grip. I must have driven another 50 yards or so, the distance between us growing, when I finally found a slightly wider spot in the road, a place where the bank on the left had crumbled away a bit. It wasn't ideal, but it was enough to get my tires partly off the main track. I pulled over, my right tires dipping into the soft shoulder. I threw the truck into park. The engine was still running. Now I had a better view. I turned in my seat, looking back through the big rear window of my truck canopy. The canopy windows were dirty, streaked with dust and dead bugs, but I could see clearly enough. The figure was still there. It hadn't moved an inch. The sheer size of it was staggering. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing absolutely dwarfed me. I'd estimate it was at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. It was just this immense, dark, silent presence in the middle of nowhere. We sat there like that for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. Me, frozen in my truck cab, and it, frozen in the road. The only sound was the rough idle of my engine and the frantic thumping of my own heart. I remember my mouth was so dry I couldn't have swallowed if I tried. Then it moved. It didn't start walking. It pivoted. It shifted its weight onto its left leg, and its whole upper body turned smoothly, almost mechanically to the left, facing the steep, rocky hillside on the other side of the road. Its arms swung with the motion, those long, heavy arms, like pendulums. There was a grace to it that was completely at odds with its size. It wasn't clumsy. It wasn't human. It was fluid and powerful, like water flowing over a rock. And then it took a step, just one step. It was a long, effortless stride, a single, powerful motion that carried it from the center of the road, across the opposite lane, and right up to the base of that steep, rocky embankment. The embankment was practically a cliff face, jagged with basalt rocks and loose scree, covered in a few tenacious, dry bushes. No human could have climbed it, not without ropes and gear, and certainly not in a single step. But it didn't climb. It just disappeared. One moment it was there, its dark form seeming to blend into the deep shadows at the base of the hill, and the next, it was gone. It didn't scramble or crash through the brush. It was just absorbed by the landscape, vanished. I sat there, staring at the empty spot. My brain was short-circuiting. I couldn't make sense of what I'd just seen. The stillness rushed back in, but it wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy, oppressive. The forest had gone dead quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just the sound of my idling truck and the blood roaring in my ears. I don't know how long I sat there, long enough for the reality of the situation to sink in, and with it, a cold, penetrating fear that started in my gut and spread out to my fingers and toes, making them feel numb. I had to go back. I had to see. I had to prove to myself that I hadn't just lost my mind. I put the truck in drive and did a clumsy three-point turn right there in the narrow road, my tires spinning a little in the gravel. I drove back slowly, my eyes scanning the woods, my head on a swivel. Every shadow looked like a moving shape. Every tree stump looked like a crouching figure. I stopped the truck right where I'd seen it standing. I left the engine running and the driver's side door open, the ding-ding-ding of the open door alarm sounding absurdly loud and out of place. I had to see the ground. I walked to the center of the road, my boots crunching in the gravel. The air was cold now, and I realized I was shivering. I looked down at the spot where its feet must have been. The gravel was disturbed, but that was from my tires. I knelt down, my knees pressing into the sharp stones, and looked closer, sweeping my hands over the surface. Nothing. No clear footprint. No impression. The gravel was too loose, too chunky. It was just a mess of rocks and dust. If something heavy had stood here, it hadn't left a mark that I could recognize. I stood up and walked across the road to where it had taken that one impossible step. The embankment was even more intimidating up close. It was steep, probably a 60 or 70 degree slope, made of crumbling rock and dirt. I looked for broken branches, disturbed rocks, any sign of a passage. There was nothing, no scuff marks, no displaced stones. The dry, brittle bushes were undisturbed. It was as if the hillside had simply opened up and swallowed it whole. That's when the full weight of it hit me. This wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man in a weird suit. It wasn't anything I could explain. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, mixed with a profound, deep-seated dread. I was alone out here. The sun was dipping below the hills, and the shadows were merging into one solid blanket of darkness. The temperature was dropping fast. I scrambled back to my truck, slammed the door shut, silencing the alarm. I locked the doors. It was a stupid, pointless gesture, but I did it anyway. I sat there for a minute just breathing, trying to get my heart rate under control. It was no use. I wasn't going to camp here. I wasn't going to camp anywhere nearby. The thought of being out of my truck in a flimsy tent in the pitch black with that thing out there, no. Just no. I put the truck in drive and got the hell out of there. I didn't stop driving until I hit paved road. And even then I kept going, all the way back to my apartment in the city. I didn't even bother unloading my gear that night. I just walked inside, locked the door, and poured myself a very large drink, my hands still shaking so badly I could barely hold the glass. I've replayed that moment in my head 1,000 times since then, the way it pivoted, the swing of its arms, the effortless single step that carried it across the road and into a wall of rock, the utter silence of its disappearance. I'm a practical guy. I fix things for a living. I need logic and reason. But I have no logic for this. No reason. I saw something that day on Gravel Road 1502 that shouldn't exist. Something that moved in a way nothing should be able to move. And it looked right back at the world I know, from a place I can never, ever understand. And sometimes, late at night, I can still feel the chill of that silence and see the perfect, terrible grace of that one step. And I know with a certainty that keeps me awake that I got a glimpse of something I was never meant to see. Story 8. Okay, so this happened back in mid-July of 2004. I've never really talked about it much because, Well, who'd believe me, but I've been sitting on this for years, and I guess it's time to get it out there. I live inside the Flathead Indian Reservation, near a little spot called Aero, Montana. It's pretty remote out here. Lots of woods, creeks, and that kind of quiet that sinks into your bones. My husband and I have a small house tucked away from the main roads, surrounded by pine trees and that thick undergrowth that seems to swallow sound. It's peaceful usually, or it was until that day. I remember it was a Tuesday, and the heat was just oppressive. The kind of day where the air feels heavy and still, like a blanket you can't shake off. I'd been inside most of the morning, doing chores and trying to stay cool with the windows open. We have 2 dogs, a mutt named Buddy and an older lab mix called Daisy. They're usually pretty laid back, content to nap on the porch or follow me around the yard. But around 2 in the afternoon, something shifted. I was in the kitchen wiping down counters when I noticed they'd both gone quiet. Normally they'd be snoozing or scratching at the door to go out, but they were just sitting by the back door, ears perked up, tails stiff. At first I thought maybe a squirrel or a deer was passing through. We get a lot of wildlife out here, so it's not unusual for the dogs to get excited. But this was different. Buddy started this low growl deep in his throat, and Daisy began whining, this high-pitched sound that grated on my nerves. I called them over, but they wouldn't budge. They just kept staring at the door, like something was right on the other side. I tried to open it to let them out. Sometimes they just need to do their business. But Daisy actually backed away, whining louder, and Buddy planted himself in front of me, as if to block me from going out. That's when I felt the first prickle of unease. These dogs aren't skittish. They've chased off bears before, or at least barked enough to scare them off. For them to refuse to go outside was weird. I decided to check it out myself. I figured maybe it was a snake or something harmless. I stepped onto the back porch, which is just a wooden deck with a couple of chairs and a view into the woods. The air was still, no wind at all, which made what happened next even stranger. About 50 feet away, near the edge of the tree line, there's this big ponderosa pine. I've seen it a million times. It's tall, with thick branches, and as I stood there, I saw it move. Not like swaying in the wind. There was no wind, but a deliberate side-to-side shift, like someone was pushing it. My heart started thumping hard in my chest. I squinted, trying to see better, and that's when I noticed something peeking out from behind the trunk. At first, my brain couldn't make sense of it. I thought it might be a bear, but bears don't stand that way. This thing was tall, maybe 6.5 feet, and it had this rusty, reddish-brown hair covering its body. Its head was large, with a heavy brow that shadowed its eyes. But I could see they were dark, almost black, and they were fixed right on me. I froze, completely froze. My legs felt like they were rooted to the porch boards, and I couldn't even swallow. The dogs were still whining inside, but it felt like the whole world had gone silent except for the blood rushing in my ears. The creature didn't move toward me. It just stayed there, partly hidden by the tree, and it started shifting its weight from one foot to the other, like it was curious or maybe sizing me up. It had this hunched posture, but it was upright, not on all fours. The hair on its arms was matted and long, and I could see muscles bunching under it. I've seen big animals before, moose, elk, even a cougar once, but this was different. It felt intelligent, the way it was watching me. Its eyes never left my face, and I swear I could feel that gaze like a physical weight. It was intense, like it was trying to read me or something. I don't know how long we stood like that. Maybe a minute, maybe 5. Time kind of stretched out, and every second felt like an hour. I remember my hands were shaking, so I clenched them into fists to steady myself. The heat was making sweat trickle down my back, but I felt cold, chilled to the bone. I thought about shouting for my husband, but he was out running errands and wouldn't be back for a while. Part of me wanted to run back inside, but I was afraid that if I moved, it might charge or something. So I just stood there, locked in this silent stare down. After what felt like forever, I slowly shifted my weight, thinking I'd get a better angle to see if it was real or some trick of the light. But the moment I moved, the creature withdrew slightly, pulling back behind the tree so only part of its face and shoulder were visible. It didn't make a sound. No growl, no rustle, nothing. That silence was eerie. In the woods, you always hear something. Birds, insects, the crunch of leaves, but right then it was dead quiet. Like everything else had sensed it too and gone into hiding. My heart was pounding so hard, I could feel it in my throat. I knew I had to get inside. I took a slow step backward, keeping my eyes on it, and then another. When I reached the door, I fumbled for the handle, my fingers slippery with sweat. I slipped back inside and slammed the door shut, locking it quickly. The dogs rushed over, pressing against my legs, still whining. I leaned against the door, breathing heavy, and peered out the window next to it. From there, I had a clearer view of the tree line. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, the creature stepped out fully from behind the tree. It was hunched over, but standing on two legs, and it moved with a kind of grace that surprised me. Smooth, almost fluid, but powerful. It didn't look at me again. Instead, it turned its head toward the woods, and then it just melted into the trees. No sound, no crashing through brush, nothing. One moment it was there, and the next, it was gone, like it had never been there at all. I stayed by the window for a long time, maybe 10 minutes, just staring at the spot where it had been. My mind was racing. What was that? A bear? No, bears don't move like that, and they're not that tall or upright. A person in a costume, out here, that seemed even crazier. The reservation is big, but people don't just wander around dressed like that. Plus, the way it moved, it was too natural, too animal-like, but with this weird intelligence behind it. When my husband got home a couple of hours later, I was still jumpy. I told him what happened, and he gave me this look like I'd lost it, but he knows I'm not one to make things up. We decided to go check it out together. The dogs didn't want to come, so we left them inside. The sun was starting to dip lower, casting long shadows, and the woods felt different, darker, more menacing. We walked over to where I'd seen the creature. The ground there is mostly dirt and pine needles, with some knapweed growing around, and right where it had been standing, the knapweed was pressed down in a patch about the size of a large person. Not broken or torn, just flattened, like something heavy had been standing there for a while. The dirt around it was disturbed too, but there weren't any clear footprints, just some vague impressions that could have been anything. No claw marks, no scat, nothing obvious. My husband knelt down and felt the ground. Something was here, he said, and his voice was quiet, serious. That's when I knew he believed me. We looked around for a bit, but didn't find anything else. No hair, no more signs. The tree it had been behind had a few low branches that were bent, but that could have been from animals. As we walked back to the house, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see those dark eyes watching us again. The whole thing left me terrified. Not because it was aggressive, it hadn't threatened me or anything, but because it was so real, so close. That intense, wordless encounter made me feel like I'd brushed up against something I wasn't supposed to see. For weeks after that, I checked the woods every day, sometimes multiple times a day. I'd stand on the porch and scan the tree line, hoping to see something, but also dreading it. The dogs stayed skittish for a while, especially at night, barking at noises they'd usually ignore. But I never saw the creature again. No more moving trees, no silent watchers. It's been years now and life has gone back to normal, but I can't shake that feeling. Every time I step outside, I'm more aware of the woods, of the shadows between the trees. I used to love hiking out here, but now I stick closer to the house. That thing, whatever it was, changed how I see the world around me. It's like I know there's something out there, something that doesn't fit into any box I've got, and I'll never be able to explain it. Story 9. All right, so I've never really shared this with many people because honestly, who'd believe me? But it's been weighing on me for years, and I figure if I'm ever going to get it off my chest, this is the place. My name's Frank Mitchell, and back in May of 1988, I was working as a crop duster in Lee County, South Carolina. It's a quiet area, lots of farmland and woods, and most days were pretty routine, but this one day, man, it stuck with me. I still get chills thinking about it. That morning started out like any other. I woke up early, around 5 o'clock, because I had a big day ahead. A few farms needed spraying, and the weather had been iffy lately. When I stepped outside, the air was thick with fog. Not just a light mist, but the kind that hangs low and makes everything look hazy and unreal. I remember feeling annoyed because fog like that can delay takeoff. It messes with visibility, and when you're flying a small plane like mine, a Piper Pawnee, you don't take chances. So I headed to the airstrip, which was just a dirt runway on the edge of town, surrounded by pine trees and fields. The fog was so dense that I could barely see 50 feet in front of me. I sat in my truck for a bit, sipping coffee from a thermos, waiting for it to lift. The radio was playing some old country song, but I wasn't really listening. My mind was on the work. How many acres I needed to cover, the fuel levels, all that stuff. By around 7 o'clock, the fog hadn't cleared much, but it was starting to thin out enough that I figured I could give it a shot. I've been flying for over 10 years at that point, so I knew the risks, but I also knew the farmers were counting on me. The plane was already fueled and loaded with pesticide, so I did my pre-flight check. Everything seemed fine. Engine sounded good, controls responsive. I climbed into the cockpit, and the smell of fuel and damp earth hit me like always. It's a familiar scent, one that usually calms me down, but that day something felt off. Not in a spooky way, just, I don't know, a restlessness. Maybe it was the fog making everything too quiet. Normally you hear birds or distant traffic, but that morning it was dead silent, eerily quiet. I taxied to the end of the runway, the wheels crunching on the gravel. The fog was still patchy, with swirls of grey drifting across the field. I lined up, pushed the throttle forward, and started rolling. The engine roared to life, and the plane picked up speed. I was focused on the runway ahead, watching for any obstacles, my hands tight on the controls. The vibration from the engine hummed through the seat, and I could feel the acceleration building. We were maybe halfway down the runway, going at a good clip, when it happened. Out of nowhere, this thing loped across in front of me. I mean, it came from the left side, from the tree line, and it moved fast, but not panicked. It was big, taller than a man, I'd say, maybe 7 feet or so, and its body was covered in this matted greyish-brown hair. The face, God, the face is what got me. It was like a monkey's, but not quite, more elongated, with deep-set eyes that seemed dark and intelligent. Its arms were long, swinging as it moved, and it had a sort of hunched posture. It didn't run. It loped, like a gorilla but smoother, almost graceful, and it was calm. That's what freaked me out the most. It didn't look scared or startled, just crossed the runway like it had every right to be there. My heart just about jumped out of my chest. I swear I felt this cold wave wash over me, and my hands started shaking. I jerked the controls a bit, but I didn't swerve or anything. Instinct kicked in, and I kept the plane steady. The whole thing lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. I could see it clearly because I was low to the ground, and the fog had thinned enough right there. It looked right at the airplane as it crossed, not a glare, just a glance, like it was curious. Then it vanished into the trees on the other side, disappearing into the shadows, like it was never there. By then, I was airborne. The plane lifted off, and I climbed quickly, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I kept looking back, down at the spot where it had been, but there was nothing. Just the empty runway and the trees swaying slightly in the breeze. I tried to tell myself it was a bear or something. We have black bears around here, but they don't move like that, and they're not that tall. This thing was different. Its movements were too fluid, too human-like, but not human at all. The fear was immediate and raw, like a punch to the gut. I remember my breath catching, and I had to force myself to breathe normally. The cockpit felt suddenly small, and I was sweating even though the air was cool. I gained altitude and circled back over the area. The fog was lifting more now, and I could see the whole runway and the surrounding woods. I flew low, maybe a couple 100 feet up, scanning the trees for any sign, but there was nothing. No movement, no broken branches, no tracks in the mud near the edge. It was like it had never existed. I made a few passes, my eyes glued to the ground, but all I saw was the usual: deer trails, patches of undergrowth, the quiet stillness of the forest. Part of me wanted to land right then and go look, but I knew that was stupid. What would I do? Wander into the woods alone after seeing something like that? No way. So I kept flying, doing my job. I sprayed the fields I was supposed to, but my mind wasn't on it. Every shadow in the trees made me jump. Every rustle of leaves in the wind seemed ominous. I kept replaying the moment in my head, the way it moved, that calm demeanor, the strange appearance. It wasn't aggressive, but that almost made it worse. If it had been running or acting scared, I might have thought it was just an animal. But it was so deliberate, so unbothered, like it owned the place. The rest of the flight was a blur. I finished up around noon and headed back to the airstrip. Landing was tense. I kept expecting to see it again, but the runway was clear. I taxied to the hangar, shut off the engine, and just sat there for a minute, trying to calm down. My hands were still trembling, and I felt this deep unease settling in my stomach. I got out of the plane and walked around, checking the area near where I'd seen it. The ground was soft from recent rain, but there were no unusual tracks, just my own footprints and some deer prints. I even walked a little way into the trees, but I didn't go far. The woods felt different now, darker and more closed in. I heard a twig snap somewhere, and I froze, my heart racing again, but it was probably just a squirrel or something. I turned back and headed to my truck. I didn't tell anyone about it that day. Who would I tell? The guys at the diner would have laughed me out of the place, so I kept it to myself, but it ate at me. That evening, I went home and tried to relax, but I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing loping across the runway, its face, those eyes. I've seen a lot of weird stuff in my years flying. UFOs? No, but odd weather patterns, animals in strange places, but nothing like this. This felt primal, like I'd glimpsed something I wasn't supposed to see. I've thought about it a lot since then. Was it a bear? A person in a costume? But it was too big, too fast, and the way it moved. No, it was real, and it's left me with this lingering unease. Even now, when I fly over that area, I get a knot in my stomach. I've never seen it again, and part of me is glad, but part of me wonders, what was it? Where did it go? I'll probably never know, and that's the scariest part. It's just one of those things that happened, and I've got to live with it. Story 10. It was June of 2004. I was Lynn Smith, a part-time summer counselor at this outdoor experience camp for teenage boys. These weren't your average kids. They were all receiving some kind of mental health care, and the idea was that nature and structure would be good for them. The camp was in Colorado, not far from the big Cimarron River. It was beautiful country, all pine trees and sharp, clean air. But that beauty had an edge to it, a feeling of being watched that I could never quite shake. The whole 3-week camp had been strange, little things adding up that we'd brushed off. But this one day, the day of the overnight trip, was the day everything came to a head. It was the day I stopped feeling like a counselor and started feeling like prey. We'd hiked to a new area, a place the camp boss said he'd scouted but wasn't super familiar with. That should have been the first red flag. The spot we picked to make camp was off. It was a natural lean-to, a space under a rock overhang that was already there. The ground was covered in this thick layer of leaf debris, like a mattress, and the grass around it was trampled down flat, not by us. It looked like something big had been bedding down there regularly. It felt used, occupied. I remember running my hand over the crushed grass and feeling a knot in my stomach. It was too perfect, too ready for us. It felt like we were moving into someone else's home without an invitation. We set up anyway. What else were we going to do? It was getting late. We got a small fire going, cooked dinner, those dehydrated pasta meals that always taste like cardboard and salt. The boys were in good spirits, joking around, but I felt this low-grade dread humming under my skin. It was a physical feeling, a tightness in my shoulders, and a need to keep scanning the tree line. The woods were too quiet. You know how in a normal forest you hear birds, squirrels, the wind? This was a thick, heavy silence, like the woods were holding their breath. After dinner, we did the group counseling session. It was part of the program. The boys talked about their fears, their goals. I tried to listen, to be present, but my mind was out there, in the dark beyond the firelight. The camp boss, a quiet, capable man in his 50s who'd spent his whole life in these mountains, felt it too. I could see it in the way he sat, not relaxed, but poised. He kept looking past the boys, into the blackness, his eyes narrowed. When it was time to turn in, the feeling was worse. We all got into our sleeping bags under the lean-to. The boys were zipped up, whispering to each other for a while, before their breathing evened out into sleep. The camp boss and I were on the outside edges of the group, him closest to the open side. The fire had died down to a bed of orange coals that pulsed with a faint, dying light. That's when we heard it. It wasn't far, 20 yards, maybe 30. It started low, a guttural growl that vibrated in my chest, and then it ripped open the night. A scream. A blood-curdling, hair-standing on end, pure rage kind of scream. It wasn't an animal in pain. It wasn't a bobcat or a fox. This was something different. It was a sound of absolute, furious violation. It was the sound of something that owned these woods. And it was in rage that we were there. The sound didn't echo. It was swallowed by the trees, making it feel even more close, more intimate. It was meant for us. My heart didn't just pound. It felt like a bird trying to beat its way out of my ribcage. I froze solid, my breath stuck in my throat. Every single hair on my arms and neck stood straight up. Next to me, I heard the sharp, metallic slide of the camp boss's .45 pistol being drawn from its holster. The sound was incredibly loud in the suffocating silence that followed the scream. He didn't say a word. He just reached over, his movements slow and precise, and pressed the cold, hard handle of his hunting knife into my hand. My fingers closed around it on instinct. The grip was rough. The blade felt heavy and deadly. I'd never held a knife like that, not with the intention of using it. He leaned close to my ear, his voice a low, tight whisper. Lynn. Just my name. I turned my head, my eyes wide, and I could see his face in the faint glow of the coals. It was grim, set in hard lines. He looked old and he looked scared, and that scared me more than the scream had. That was no bear, he whispered, his breath a ghost in the cold air. Not a cat either, nothing I've ever heard. My mind was racing, a frantic, useless scramble. What else was there? What else could make a sound like that? If it comes, he said, his voice barely audible, if I tell you to, you get these boys up and you run. You don't look back. You follow the river downstream. You just run. You understand me? I nodded, a stiff, jerky motion. My throat was too tight to speak. Run with 8 sleeping teenagers through unfamiliar woods in the pitch black. The impossibility of it was almost funny, but I wasn't laughing. I was gripping the knife so hard my knuckles ached, and then we waited. We sat there side by side, him with his pistol aimed at the darkness, me with the knife held in both hands, pointed shakily outward. We didn't talk. We just listened. The boys slept on, completely oblivious, their soft snores a bizarre, peaceful counterpoint to the sheer terror we were feeling. I remember feeling a weird, fierce jealousy of them. They were safe in their ignorance, while we were trapped in this awful, knowing vigil. The woods were still silent, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was a listening silence. Something was out there, and it was listening back. I could feel its attention on us, a heavy, intelligent pressure. I started hearing things, or maybe I was imagining them. A soft crunch of a leaf, a faint rustle in the bushes just beyond the ring of our dead firelight. Every time a sound came, my whole body would flinch, and I'd grip the knife tighter, my palms slick with sweat. I kept staring into the blackness, my eyes playing tricks on me. Shapes would form in the shadows between the trees, a hulking shoulder, a dark, massive head. I'd blink, and they'd be gone. But the feeling of being watched never went away. It intensified. It felt like we were being circled, studied. The cold seeped up from the ground into my bones. I was shivering, but not just from the temperature. It was a deep, cellular fear. My muscles were locked, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. Time stopped having any meaning. We could have been sitting there for 10 minutes or 3 hours. It was just an endless stretch of darkness and fear and waiting for something to happen. My mind kept going back to the figure we'd seen on the hill a week or so earlier. We'd thought it was a hiker, way off in the distance. But when we got to within 200 yards, it turned its head. The movement was wrong. It wasn't a human turning to look. It was this stiff, swiveling motion, and then it just walked away. Its gait was off too, long, loping strides that covered ground in a way a person just couldn't. We'd both seen it. We'd both felt the chills. We'd hurried back to the kids without saying a word, both of us pretending we hadn't just seen something that shouldn't exist. Sitting there in the dark, that memory wasn't a weird story anymore. It was a piece of a puzzle, and the puzzle was forming the shape of something huge and powerful and very, very angry. A branch snapped, loud and sharp, to our left. The camp boss shifted his aim instantly, the barrel of the .45 following the sound. My heart leaped into my throat. I held my breath. This was it. It was coming, but nothing emerged. The silence descended again, heavier than before. The pressure was immense. I could feel a presence, a kind of raw, wild intelligence focused on our little camp. It wasn't just an animal. An animal would have attacked or run away. This thing was considering us. I don't know how long we sat like that. Eventually, the sky began to lighten from absolute black to a deep, pre-dawn grey. The shapes of the trees became distinct again. The birds impossibly started to sing. The ordinary sounds of morning felt like a miracle. As the sun finally began to crest the hills, painting the sky in weak pastels, the camp boss slowly, carefully lowered his pistol. His arm must have been cramping from holding it up for so long. He let out a long, shaky breath, a sound I'd been holding in myself for what felt like an eternity. I looked down at the knife in my hands. My fingers were stiff and white from clutching it. I had to pry them open. The boys started to stir, yawning and stretching, completely unaware of the armed vigil we had just kept over their sleep. One of them joked about the cold ground. Another asked what was for breakfast. Their normalcy was jarring. We broke camp quickly, without talking much. The camp boss was quiet, his face unreadable. We packed up our gear, stamped out the fire pit, and got the hell out of that place. We hiked back to the main base in a tense, hurried silence. The boys picked up on our mood and stopped joking around. When we got back, the camp psychologist pulled us aside. We told him what had happened, about the scream, about the vigil. He listened, nodded, and then he said it. He said it so calmly, like he was diagnosing a common cold. "It sounds like you were visited by a Sasquatch." He said it. Sasquatch. Bigfoot. Hearing the word out loud, in the bright light of day, should have made it seem silly. It didn't. It just made the fear solidify into a cold, hard stone in my gut. It gave a name to the thing in the dark. It made it real. We had other weird things happen. A few nights later, a smell hit our camp. A stench like rotten meat and wet dog, so thick you could almost taste it. It circled us for what felt like forever before it just faded away. But nothing. Nothing ever compared to that night. That's the thing that's etched into me. It's not just the memory of the sound. It's the memory of the physical act of waiting, the cold weight of that knife in my hands, the way my muscles screamed from being tensed for so long, the taste of pure, undiluted fear in my mouth, the sight of the camp boss's face, pale and determined in the faint glow of the coals, ready to fight something he couldn't understand, the profound, terrifying knowledge that we were not at the top of the food chain out there, that something else was, and it knew we were in its home. I still have dreams about it. I wake up sometimes, my heart hammering, convinced I can smell that rotten stench or hear that scream echoing just outside my window. My family laughs. They call me the Bigfoot lady. I usually just shrug and change the subject, because how do you explain that kind of fear? How do you describe the feeling of a presence so vast and so alien that it rewires your understanding of the world? You can't. You just live with it. You just remember sitting in the dark, armed and terrified, waiting for a monster to step out of the trees, and knowing with absolute certainty that it was there. Story 11. It was one of those humid North Carolina evenings in late July, the air thick enough to drink, when my daughter came tearing into the house, her face the color of chalk. She was breathing like she'd just run a mile, her little hands shaking. I was in the kitchen, fixing the leaky faucet for the 100th time, and I remember the sound of her sneakers skidding on the linoleum. "Dad," she gasped, her voice a tight wire. "There's something in the trees." I put the wrench down, wiping my greasy hands on my jeans. "A deer, sweetie? A big one?" "We get a lot of them, bold as anything, eating my wife's marigolds." She shook her head, her eyes wide and fixed on mine. "No, it was tall, like way taller than you, and it was standing up, like a person, but not." I tried to keep my face calm, but a little knot of something, not quite fear, more like unease, tightened in my gut. My daughter is 10. She's not a liar, and she's not prone to wild fantasies. She's a practical kid, more interested in soccer stats than ghost stories. "Where?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "By the basketball court." It just stepped out from the pines, looked right at me for a second, and then went back in. It was all dark, and it was quiet. It didn't make a sound. I went outside with her, the screen door slamming behind us. The basketball court is maybe 50 yards from the house, bordered on one side by a thick wall of loblolly pines and sweet gums. The evening light was slanting through the trees, casting long, dancing shadows. It was perfectly still. No birds, no rustling, just the hum of cicadas starting up their nightly racket. I scanned the tree line, my eyes trying to pick apart the darkness between the trunks. Nothing. I saw nothing. "Probably just a shadow, kiddo," I said, putting a hand on her shoulder. She was still trembling. "The light plays tricks out here." She didn't argue, but the look she gave me was pure, unshakable certainty. She knew what she saw. And that look, that absolute conviction in her eyes, is what stuck with me over the next couple of days. It nagged at me while I was mowing the lawn, while I was grilling burgers. It was a little splinter in my mind I couldn't dig out. Then, a few evenings later, it was my turn. I was out back near the big fallen oak. A storm had taken it down last spring, and the root ball was massive, taller than me, a huge clump of dirt and tangled roots pointing at the sky. Behind it, the land slopes down sharply towards the river. I was just walking the property line, checking for any storm damage, enjoying the first cool breath of air after a blistering day. I was about 20 feet from the oak when I saw a movement. It was behind the root ball. At first I thought it was a black bear, We get those too, a big one standing on its hind legs to get a better look, but this was different. It didn't huff or shuffle, it just rose. It uncurled from a crouch with a smooth, powerful motion that made the hair on my arms stand up. It straightened to its full height, and my brain just stuttered. This thing was colossal. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, like an NFL lineman wearing a gorilla suit made of shadows. The fur was a dark, matted brown, so dark it was almost black, and it seemed to absorb the fading light. Its head was small for its body, perched on that massive frame, and I couldn't make out any features, just a dark, blunt shape. It didn't look at me. It turned its head downhill towards the sound of the river, and then it started to walk. That was the part that really got me. The silence. Something that big, moving through a forest floor covered in dry leaves and twigs, should have sounded like a bulldozer. It should have crunched and snapped its way down the slope, but it didn't. It moved with a weird, fluid grace, each footstep landing with a soft, deliberate pressure. It was like watching a ghost, but a ghost made of solid muscle and weight. I stood there, frozen, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I watched it until it melted into the deeper shadows of the riverbank and was gone. The walk back to the house felt a mile long. Every rustle in the bushes, every creak of a branch made me jump. My skin was crawling. I couldn't shake the image of that thing, the sheer unnatural size of it, the quiet way it moved. I went inside and locked the door, something I almost never do out here. I didn't tell my wife right away. What was I going to say? Hey, honey, I think we have a 9-foot-tall monster living in the woods. She'd have called a doctor, but over the next week we both started noticing the dogs. We have 2 dogs. Buddy, a hound mix who's got a bark for everything from a falling leaf to the mailman, and Lady, an older shepherd who's usually pretty chill. Their behavior changed overnight. They stopped wanting to go out after dusk. When I'd finally shoved them out the door to do their business, they'd stick close to the porch, their tails tucked, their ears flat. They'd do what they needed to, and then scratch at the door to be let back in, whining softly. The weirdest part was the silence. Our property is 26 acres, and we're used to the night chorus, coyotes yipping, owls hooting, foxes screaming. But now, when the dogs were out, the woods would go dead quiet, and Buddy, who usually announces any and all intruders with a racket that could wake the dead, wouldn't make a peep. He'd just stand there, stock still, staring into the blackness under the trees, his whole body tense. My wife was the one who voiced the theory that made my blood run cold. We were sitting on the porch one night, watching the dogs pace nervously by the steps. You know, she said, her voice quiet, it's almost like they're scared, but not of something that's a threat. What do you mean? I asked, though a part of me already knew. Remember a few months back, when that stray dog was hanging around, the big shaggy one? Buddy and Lady would bark at first, but then they got used to him. They'd just watch him. It's like that. It's like they know whatever's out there isn't going to hurt them. They've accepted it. They're just uneasy about its presence. The idea that this thing had been around long enough and been passive enough for our dogs to consider it a non-threatening part of the environment was terrifying. It meant it wasn't just passing through, it was staying, it was watching. The real terror, the moment that is burned into my brain forever, happened about a week after I first saw it. I was taking the trash out to the big can we keep near the edge of the woods. It was full dark, maybe 10 o'clock. The motion sensor light on the side of the house flicked on, casting a harsh white cone over the gravel driveway and the first few feet of tree line. I heaved the bag into the can and turned to go back inside. And that's when I saw it. It was standing at the very edge of the light, maybe 30 yards away, half hidden behind the thick trunk of a hickory tree. The motion light hadn't triggered for it. It must have been standing perfectly still. This time it was looking right at me. The light from the porch didn't reach its face, but I could feel its gaze. It was a physical pressure, a cold weight on my skin. I could see it more clearly now. The fur wasn't just dark. It was long and shaggy, caked with mud or leaves in places. Its shoulders were even more massive than I remembered, sloping down to powerful long arms that hung at its sides. Its hands were curled, not quite fists, and they looked huge. The head was small, yes, but I could see the suggestion of a heavy brow ridge. We stood there, frozen in that bizarre standoff for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 10 seconds. My breath caught in my throat. My feet were rooted to the gravel. Every primal instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, but some deeper, older part knew that would be the worst thing I could do. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. It was a deep, cellular cold, the kind of fear that's so pure it feels like a presence itself. This wasn't a bear. This wasn't a man in a suit. This was something else, something ancient and wild and profoundly other. Then it moved. It didn't run or charge. It simply took one slow, deliberate step back, deeper into the shadows. Its movement was utterly silent. One moment it was there, a monstrous silhouette at the edge of my world, and the next, it was gone. The woods swallowed it whole. I don't remember walking back to the house. I must have, because I found myself standing in my kitchen, my back against the locked door, my heart trying to pound its way out of my chest. I was drenched in a cold sweat, and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get a glass of water. That was a few summers ago, and it's come back every year since. It's a summer thing. From late June through August, the feeling returns. The dogs get that quiet, watchful unease. The woods fall silent at strange times. We'll hear things, not howls, not screams, but deep, guttural knocks, like someone is hitting a tree with a giant wooden club. Sometimes late at night, there's a sound I can only describe as a low, chuffing grunt, so deep you feel it in your bones more than hear it with your ears. We'll see movements. A dark shape glimpsed between trees at dusk. A flicker of motion in the periphery that's gone when you turn your head. Once, my wife saw a single, huge, 5-toed footprint pressed into the mud by the riverbank after a rain before it washed away. I've thought about setting up trail cameras. I've looked them up online, read the reviews. I've even driven to the sporting goods store and stood in the aisle holding one in my hand. But I always put it back. What would I do with a picture? Prove it to the world. Have a bunch of guys in camo vans show up with rifles and tranquilizer darts, trampling through my land, turning this, whatever it is, into a spectacle. Or worse, proving nothing and having everyone think I'm crazy. This thing, this presence, it hasn't hurt us. It hasn't threatened us. It watches. It's just here. A part of the land, a secret the woods are keeping. Accepting it feels strange, I know that. But after that night, after looking into that darkness and feeling it look back, a kind of understanding settled over me. This is its place too. We're just living in it. So we go on. We mow the lawn. My daughter plays basketball. We have cookouts. And every summer when the air gets thick and the fireflies come out, we know we're being watched from the tree line. It's a quiet, unspoken truth in our house. We don't talk about it much. We just listen a little more carefully to the sounds of the night, and we make sure we're inside before it gets too dark. Story 12. It was early January 2015. I remember because we'd just gotten through the New Year's holiday, and the deep cold had settled in for good. The kind of cold that doesn't just nip at you, it bites and holds on. I'd been a state park ranger in Aroostook County for over 15 years at that point. You get to know the woods, the rhythms of the seasons, the way the light falls in different months. You think you've seen everything. You're wrong. That morning, I was on snowmobile patrol. My shift started in the dead of night, around 4 in the morning. It was a routine check of the fire roads and the more remote trails, making sure no one was stupid enough to be camping in this weather, looking for any signs of trouble. I was riding an old Ski-Doo Tundra, a workhorse that never let me down. The headlight cut a tunnel through the blackness, The engine's whine, the only sound in a world that felt completely frozen still. My route took me near a place we call Whisper Pond. It's not on most maps. It's a decent-sized body of water, maybe a half-mile across, ringed by a thick stand of spruce and birch. In the summer, it's a gorgeous spot, but in winter, it's just a flat white plain surrounded by skeleton trees. I'd stopped on a small ridge overlooking the pond to take a breather. I killed the engine, and the silence that rushed in was absolute. It's a heavy kind of quiet up here, a pressure on your eardrums. I tugged my balaclava down below my chin, the air so cold it felt like tiny needles in my lungs with every breath. I could see the plume of my own exhalation, lit by the first faint hint of light in the sky. Dawn wasn't for another hour, but the black was softening to a deep, bruised grey. I was just scanning the tree line across the pond, more out of habit than anything, when I saw it, a dark shape, moving. My first thought was, idiot moose, they'll walk out on the ice sometimes, but this was different. It was upright. My brain tried to file it away as a bear, but bears don't walk like that, not in January, and they sure as hell aren't that tall. I fumbled in my parka pocket for my binoculars. My fingers were stiff and clumsy, even inside my thick gloves. I got the binocs up to my eyes, my heart starting to thump a little harder against my ribs. It took me a second to find it again in the lenses, to adjust the focus. And then I saw it clearly. It was a creature. There's no other word for it. It was huge, over 8 feet tall, I'd guess. It was covered in long, shaggy hair, a dark brown that was almost black against the snow. It had massive, broad shoulders that tapered down to a narrower waist. Its head was kind of conical, like a dome. And it didn't seem to have much of a neck. Its arms, God, its arms were so long, they hung down past its knees, swinging slightly as it walked. It was moving across the frozen pond with a smooth, powerful, bipedal gait. It wasn't shuffling or loping. It was walking purposefully, like a man would, but all wrong. The terror didn't hit me all at once. It was a slow, cold dread that started in my gut and seeped outwards. This was no known animal. The proportions were all wrong. The legs were too thick, the torso too short for the incredible height, the arms just impossibly long. It moved with a calm confidence that was chilling. It wasn't hurrying, it wasn't looking around. It was just crossing the pond, step after steady step. I watched, frozen, my breath caught in my throat. I could see the individual strides it was taking. Each step left a deep, clear impression in the fresh snow on the ice. I'm good at estimating distances, and I clocked its stride at about 4.5 feet apart, just a steady, ground-eating pace. The most unnerving part was the silence. My world was still utterly silent. The snowmobile was off. The wind was dead. And this thing, this massive thing, was walking without making a sound. No crunch of snow, no crackle of ice, nothing. I could see puffs of steam coming from its body in the frigid air, little clouds of heat from a living engine, but no sound accompanied them. It crossed the entire pond in under a minute. It never once looked in my direction. It just reached the far tree line, stepped between 2 large spruce trees, and was gone. Just like that. Vanished into the shadows of the forest. No crashing through brush, no snapped branches. It was there, and then it wasn't. For a long time I didn't move. I just stood there, binoculars still pressed to my face, staring at the empty space where it had been. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my temples. The cold, which I had ignored for those 60 seconds, came rushing back, seeping through my layers, making me shiver violently. I lowered the binoculars. My hands were shaking. I had to go down there. I'm a ranger. It's my job. But every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get on the snowmobile and get the hell out of there. I forced myself to start the engine. The noise was jarring, an invasion of the silence. I drove down the slope towards the pond, my head on a swivel, scanning every shadow between the trees. I stopped my sled a good 50 yards from the edge of the pond. I got off, my legs feeling weak. I had my rifle slung over my shoulder, but my hand didn't even go to it. It felt useless. What was I going to shoot at? And more importantly, what if I just pissed it off? I walked towards the tracks. The snow was deep, up to my knees in places. When I reached the point where it had stepped onto the ice, I stopped and just stared. The footprints were profound. They were huge, 16 inches long, easy, 7 inches wide. They were sunk deep into the snow on top of the ice, and I could see the clear outline of them. They weren't blurry or melted. They were sharp. I could see the toe impressions, 5 of them. They weren't like a bear's track at all. They were almost human, but scaled up to a nightmare size, and there was no sign of slippage. The ice was slick. I'd nearly fallen just walking from my sled, but this thing had walked across it with perfect, stable traction. I followed the trail, my own boots crunching loudly, a sound that now felt obscene. The tracks went in a straight, unwavering line, from one side of the pond to the other. When I got to the other side, to where it had entered the trees, I saw more. There were broken saplings, not chewed or knocked over by a clumsy animal. They were snapped off cleanly, about 4.5, 5 feet off the ground, chest height for it. It had just pushed through them without breaking stride, and then I smelled it, a faint odor hanging in the still, cold air. It was musky, like damp earth and old, wet animal hide. It wasn't a skunk smell or a bear smell. It was something else, something primal and wild. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I did my job. I took pictures with my department-issued digital camera. I got shots of the tracks, the broken saplings. I measured the stride with a tape measure from my pack. 4.5 feet, exactly as I'd guessed. I even found a rock, a big bastard, must have weighed 100 pounds, that had been displaced from its mossy bed near the tree line. It was just rolled over, like something had kicked it or stepped on it casually. I spent maybe 20 minutes there, but it felt like hours. The whole time, the feeling of being watched was so intense, it was a physical weight on my shoulders. I was a professional, a man of the woods, and I was terrified, not of an animal, but of the unknown. Of the fact that the world I thought I knew had just been proven to contain something that shouldn't exist. I finally packed up my gear and got back on the snowmobile. I finished my patrol, but I don't remember a damn thing about the rest of it. My mind was back at that pond. When I got back to the ranger station later that morning, I tried to report it. I showed the pictures. I told my story. The reactions were what you'd expect. A few of the younger guys looked intrigued, but my supervisor, a guy who'd been behind a desk for 10 years, just gave me a patronizing smile. Probably a moose, John. The light plays tricks, or a bear with mange. You know how it is. He didn't even look at the pictures of the tracks closely. They wrote it up as an unidentified animal sighting and filed it away. I felt a hot flush of anger and frustration. But what could I do? I went back out there a few days later with one of the other rangers, a friend of mine. The weather had warmed slightly, and a fresh dusting of snow had fallen. The tracks were gone. The rock was still there. The saplings were still broken, but the evidence was fading. We were standing there, and a sound cut through the trees. It wasn't a howl or a roar. It was something else. A long, drawn-out vocalization, deep and guttural, like a wood being sawed mixed with a low groan. It was far away, but it echoed through the forest. My friend looked at me, his eyes wide. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. I just shook my head. I knew. I didn't have to say it. That was years ago now. I still patrol that same area. I still go past Whisper Pond on my snowmobile route. Every time I slow down, I look, I scan the tree line. I've never seen it again. I've never found another track like that, but I'm forever changed. The woods don't feel the same. That deep, comfortable familiarity is gone, replaced by a constant low-level vigilance. The memory of that thing, its impossible shape, its silent, powerful walk, the sheer otherness of it, is burned into my brain. It was real. I saw it, and sometimes, in the dead quiet of a winter dawn, when the light is just starting to filter through the clouds. I feel that same cold dread wash over me again, and I know, with a certainty that chills me to my core, that I'm not alone out there. I just don't know what else is. Story 13. All right, I'm just going to type this out. I've been putting it off for over a year now, but I need to get it out of my head. I've told one person, my dad, and he just listened quietly, which is his way. He knows me. He knows I don't spook easy. But this was different. I don't know what it was, and I guess that's the worst part. It was July 17th last year, 2021. I was 29, and I'd been camping solo since I was a teenager. I'm not some greenhorn. I know the woods, especially the Prescott National Forest. I know the sounds, the smells, what's normal and what isn't. This trip was supposed to be 3 days of quiet, just me, my pack, and a few good books. I was set up in a spot I'd used before, maybe 20 miles south of Chino Valley, right near a dry wash. It's usually a perfect spot, sheltered by some big pines. That afternoon, the sky started to get that bruised look, a deep, ugly purple-green to the south. You could smell the rain coming, that wet dust and ozone smell. A monsoon was building, and it was building fast. I'd been through summer storms before, so I wasn't too worried, but this one felt mean. The air got heavy and still, the kind of quiet that presses on your eardrums. I knew I needed to get my camp in order before it hit. I spent a good hour gathering as much dryish firewood as I could, stuffing it under my tarp shelter. My shelter was just a big green tarp strung between 2 trees, with the sides staked down. I had my sleeping bag and gear tucked in the middle. As the first big fat drop started to splat on the leaves, I started reinforcing the stakes, piling more rocks on them. The wind was picking up, a low moan through the pine needles, and the tarp was starting to flap and snap. Then the bottom dropped out. It wasn't just rain, it was a wall of water. The wind whipped it sideways, and my little tarp was like a sail. I was crouched under there, trying to keep my stuff dry, when I heard a new sound, a low rumble that wasn't thunder. I peeked out from under the tarp edge and looked down into the wash. It wasn't dry anymore. A foot of muddy, churning water was already rushing through it, carrying branches and debris. My stomach sank. I was in a low spot. If this kept up, my camp was going to be underwater. I'd seen flash floods before, and they don't give you a lot of warning. This was the warning. I had to move fast. I shoved my most important stuff, my sleeping bag, my food bag, my knife and my flashlight, into my pack. I left the tarp. It was a lost cause. I pulled my rain jacket hood tight and clicked on my headlamp. It was one of those bright LED ones, and the beam cut through the sheeting rain, making every drop look like a falling diamond. But it also made the darkness outside the beam feel absolute. I started hiking uphill, away from the wash. The ground was instantly slick, a mixture of wet pine needles and mud. My boots sank in with a sucking sound every step. The rain was so loud on my hood, it was like being inside a drum. I was just focused on putting one foot in front of the other, heading for higher, rockier ground where I knew I could find some overhangs to wait out the worst of it. I was maybe 5 minutes into this miserable climb when my headlamp beam swept across a patch of wet sand between 2 clumps of manzanita, and I stopped dead. There were footprints, not deer tracks, not bear tracks. I know what those look like. These were barefoot, human-like, but not. They were huge. I'm not kidding. I wear a size 12 boot, and one of my prints would have fit inside one of these with room to spare. I'm talking 16, maybe 17 inches long. The toes were clear in the wet sand, but they were long, really long, and the big toe was set apart from the others. The arch was high, and the heel was broad. My first thought was, someone's messing with me. But who? I was miles from any real trailhead, in a worsening monsoon, in the middle of a national forest. It made no sense. I crouched down, the rain pounding on my back, and just stared. The prints were fresh. The rain was already starting to blur the edges, but they were deep. Whatever made them was heavy, seriously heavy. A cold feeling, totally separate from the rain, started seeping into my gut. It was just unease at first, a low-grade hum of wrongness. I stood up and kept going, but now I was scanning the ground and the trees with my light. My heart was beating a little faster. I saw another print and another. They were heading in roughly the same direction I was, uphill. The trail of them was intermittent, sometimes lost on rocky patches, then showing up again in a soft patch of soil. That's when the feeling started to change. It's hard to describe, but every outdoorsman knows it. The feeling of being watched. It's a primal thing. The hair on my arms and the back of my neck stood up. It was a physical sensation, a tightness between my shoulder blades, like a target was painted there. I stopped and slowly turned in a circle, my headlamp beam slicing through the blackness between the tree trunks. Nothing. Just the relentless hiss and drum of the rain, the occasional groan of a tree limb in the wind. I started walking again, faster now. The unease was curdling into real fear. I was talking to myself, just muttering under my breath, "It's a bear. It's just a big bear. It's curious, that's all." But I'd never felt a bear's presence like this. This felt intelligent, purposeful. Then I heard it, or I felt it. Over the noise of the storm, there was another sound. A heavy, muffled thud. Then another. It wasn't a branch breaking, it was a weight settling, a footstep, a big one. It was off to my left, maybe 30, 40 yards away, parallel to me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I swung my light toward the sound. Nothing, just a wall of pine trunks and shadow. I stood there for a full minute, not moving, barely breathing, listening so hard my ears hurt. The thud didn't come again. Maybe it was just the storm playing tricks. I made myself start walking again, my legs feeling stiff and clumsy. The feeling of being watched was now a physical pressure, a weight on my chest. I was no longer just hiking to higher ground. I was fleeing. I kept my light aimed ahead, but my eyes were straining at the periphery, into the deep darkness my beam couldn't touch. The trail of footprints was still there, keeping pace with my route. My mind was racing, trying to fit this into a box I understood. A person? No. A bear walking on its hind legs, maybe, but the prints, the toes. Another thud. Closer this time. 20 yards, maybe less. It was a solid, dense sound, the kind of sound that vibrates in the ground. I whipped my head around, the beam of my light jerking wildly. It swept across the base of a massive ponderosa pine, and that's when I saw them. 2 points of light, amber red, like hot coals. They were reflecting my headlamp beam back at me. They were high up, way too high. I'm 6 feet tall. These eyes were a good foot, maybe 2 feet above my own eye level. 7, 8 feet off the ground. My blood went cold, pure ice water in my veins. My brain just short-circuited for a second. I couldn't process it. The beam stayed locked on those 2 glowing dots, and as my eyes adjusted, as I looked past the light, I started to make out a shape. It was a massive, dark outline, broader than any man I've ever seen. It was just standing there, perfectly still behind the tree, mostly hidden by the trunk. It was all shadow and bulk, but I could see the curve of a huge shoulder, the suggestion of a head. It wasn't moving. It was just watching me. The dread that hit me then was unlike anything I've ever felt. It wasn't just fear of being attacked. It was a deeper, more profound terror. It was the fear of being in the presence of something that shouldn't exist, something that defied the rules of my world. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack them. I couldn't swallow. My mouth was desert dry. My hand, shaking uncontrollably, fumbled for the switch on my headlamp. I clicked it off. Total, suffocating blackness. The rain was the only sound, louder than ever now that I couldn't see. I stood there in the dark, petrified. I couldn't hear it move. I couldn't hear anything but the storm. I counted to 10, each second stretching out into an eternity. What was it doing? Was it coming closer? Was it right in front of me? I had to know. I took a shaky breath and clicked the light back on. The eyes were gone. The space behind the pine tree was empty, just rain and darkness. I should have felt relief, but I didn't. The feeling of being watched was more intense than ever. It was closer now. I could feel it. I spun around, panicked, sweeping the light everywhere. Trees, rocks, bushes, nothing. Then to my right, I heard the heavy crush of something big moving through the undergrowth. It wasn't trying to be quiet. It was just moving, keeping pace with me. A branch snapped with a sound like a gunshot. I broke into a run. It was a stupid, blind, panicked run. I wasn't thinking about direction, only about getting away. I slipped on the mud, crashed through a thorny bush that tore at my jacket and pants, but I didn't care. The adrenaline was screaming through me. I could still hear it, this heavy rhythmic movement just off to my side, matching my pace effortlessly. It wasn't running. It was just loping, a steady, ground-eating stride that sounded like it took no effort at all. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like hours, but it was probably only a few minutes. My lungs were burning, my legs were on fire. My headlamp beam was bouncing all over the place, creating a dizzying strobe effect of rain-slashed trees. Then I saw it, a rocky outcrop, a small cliff face with a ledge about 10 feet up. It was my only chance. I scrambled up the rocks, my fingers scraping on the wet stone, my boots slipping. I hauled myself onto the ledge and immediately pressed my back against the cold, wet rock face. I was hyperventilating. I turned off my headlamp again and sat there in the pitch black, listening. The rain was still pouring. For a long time I couldn't hear anything else, just the storm. I sat there, curled into a ball, my knees pulled up to my chest, clutching my flashlight like a club. I was shivering, partly from the cold, mostly from sheer, unadulterated terror. I stayed like that the entire night. I didn't sleep a wink. Every rustle of a leaf, every creak of a tree sent a fresh jolt of fear through me. I'd flick my light on for a second, scan the area below me, see nothing, and turn it off again. The feeling of being watched never fully went away. It was like a constant, low-grade electric current in the air. I was just an animal huddled on a rock, waiting for the dawn. The rain finally tapered off around 4 in the morning. The sky shifted from black to a deep, watery grey. As the world slowly lightened, I dared to look down from my ledge. The forest floor was a wreck of puddles and washed-out gullies. The wash I'd fled from was now a wide, brown river, roaring down the mountain, and the footprints, they were gone, all of them, washed away by the floodwaters. There was no trace left, no evidence. It was like the whole thing had been a nightmare. As soon as it was light enough to see properly, I climbed down. My body was stiff and aching. I didn't even think about looking for my old camp. I just started hiking, following the high ground, putting as much distance between me and that spot as I could. I hiked all the way back to my truck without stopping once. I called my dad when I got a signal. I just said, "Dad, something happened out there." I told him about the footprints, the eyes, the feeling. I didn't use any fancy words. I just told him what I saw and what I felt. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then he just said, "You're safe now, that's what matters." But am I? I don't know. That feeling, that deep primal dread, it stuck with me. It shook something loose in my head. I've been around black bears, mountain lions. I've even had a moose charge me once. That was scary, but it was a fear I understood. It was an animal doing what animals do. This was different. This was something that knew I was there, that watched me, that followed me, and that let me go. I can't explain the footprints. I can't explain the eyes, and I sure as hell can't explain the smell that hit me right before I saw it. A smell like wet dog and rotten meat and something else, something old and wild and wrong. I can't explain any of it, and I guess I never will. Story 14. Our neighbors were a group of immigrants, I don't even know from where. They had this makeshift shack set up near the base of the levee. They kept to themselves mostly. I remember my mum. She was always a bit of a character. She'd gotten herself a new .22 Ruger rifle. She was proud of it. I remember her showing it off one weekend, the sun glinting off the barrel. One of the men from the shack, a quiet guy, he asked to borrow it, said he was going to hunt some cottontails. My mum, she was friendly, she said yes. A day or so later I saw the rabbits. They were hanging on a wooden rack they'd built near their shack. Maybe 4 or 5 of them just dangling there. It was a strange sight for a kid, but it was just part of the landscape back then. Then things got weird. The rabbits started going missing. Not all at once, but one by one. The guy who borrowed the rifle, he got real angry about it. He thought someone was stealing from him. Tensions started to boil over. It all came to a head one night after a card game. My dad had been playing with some of the men. There was an argument, voices raised. I was in bed, but I could hear the shouting. Later I found out my dad had been beaten up. Not bad, but enough. A black eye, a split lip. He was quiet about it, but you could feel the anger and the fear in the house after that. That's the background. The main thing, the thing that still haunts me, happened the next day. It was a Saturday, I'm sure of it. The air was hot and dry, the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer over the asphalt. My mom was on edge from the night before. She told me sternly, "Do not go up over that levee. There's rattlesnakes up there." She said it with this finality that usually worked. But I was a kid, and curiosity is a powerful thing. With all the drama, the missing rabbits, my dad's beaten face, I had this burning need to see for myself, to see what was on the other side of that big dirt wall. I waited until my mum was busy inside. I remember the feeling of the sun on my arms as I walked out the back door. The levee looked massive, like a mountain. It was covered in dry, yellowed grass and scrubby bushes. I started climbing. The dirt was loose and crumbly under my sneakers. I had to use my hands in places, grabbing onto clumps of grass to pull myself up. I was scared of the rattlesnakes my mom mentioned, my eyes scanning the ground with every step, my heart thumping in my chest. It wasn't just snakes I was afraid of. It was the general feeling of doing something I knew I shouldn't be doing. It took me a few minutes to get to the top. I was breathing hard, partly from the climb, partly from the nervous excitement. I crouched down, trying to be small, and peeked over the crest. The other side wasn't some magical land. It was just more of the same, but wilder. A dry creek bed, more scrubland, and a cluster of big, old cottonwood trees off to the left. Their leaves were a dusty green, rustling softly in the hot breeze. I scanned the area, my eyes squinting against the sun. Nothing. Just emptiness. I felt a little disappointed. I don't know what I was expecting to find. Maybe the missing rabbits, or a secret hideout. And then I saw it. My eyes had just skipped past it at first, my brain registering it as just part of the tree. But then my focus snapped back. In the biggest cottonwood, maybe 50 yards away, something was sitting on a thick, low-hanging branch. It wasn't a man. It wasn't a bear. I'd seen pictures of bears. This thing was huge. It was sitting on its haunches, its posture relaxed, like it was just taking a break. It was covered in hair, but it wasn't shaggy like a bear's. It was a dark, matted brown, almost black in the shadows of the tree. Its legs were long, and one of them was swinging. That's the detail that got me, that froze the blood in my veins. It was swinging its leg, back and forth, just like a person would if they were sitting on a high stool, bored. The motion was casual, effortless. My eyes traveled up its body. Its arms were long, resting on its knees, and then I looked at its head. That's when the real terror set in. Its head was smaller than I would have thought for something that big, and it wasn't ape-like. It was almost human. It had a brow ridge, but beneath that the features were unsettlingly familiar. A nose, a mouth. It wasn't a grotesque monster face. It was a face, a thinking face. It was looking off into the distance, not at me. Its head tilted slightly as if it was listening to something. The leg kept swinging. I stopped breathing. My mouth went completely dry, like I'd swallowed a handful of dust. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic, panicked drumbeat, every muscle in my body locked up. I was crouched there, completely exposed on the top of that levee, and I couldn't move. I was a statue. My mind was screaming one word, over and over, "Go, go, go." But my body wouldn't listen. It was like I was rooted to the spot, forced to watch this impossible thing just exist. The creature shifted its weight slightly on the branch, and the movement was so fluid, so natural, that it made my skin crawl. It wasn't a clumsy animal movement, it was deliberate. The hair on its arms seemed to ripple with the motion. I could see the powerful muscles in its shoulders and back. This wasn't some skinny, lanky thing. It was dense, heavy, powerful. I remember thinking, with a clarity that was horrifying, that if it wanted to, it could tear me apart without even trying. The leg kept swinging back and forth, back and forth. The utter normalcy of that gesture in the midst of such an abnormal sight was what broke me. It was so wrong. It was like seeing your teacher at the grocery store, a jarring disconnect that your brain can't process. I don't know how long I stayed there. It could have been 5 seconds or 5 minutes. Time just stopped. But then, some deep primal survival instinct overrode the paralysis. I didn't stand up. I didn't turn around. I just moved. I pushed myself backward, scrambling on my hands and knees, my eyes still locked ahead for a terrifying second before I wrenched them away. I didn't want to see if it had noticed me. I half slid, half fell down the steep side of the levee. Dirt and small rocks skittered down with me. I wasn't careful anymore. I didn't care about rattlesnakes. The only thing that existed was the need to get down, to get away, to put that dirt wall between me and what was in that tree. I hit the bottom hard, stumbling and nearly falling. I didn't look back. I just ran. I ran across our backyard, my lungs burning, my legs pumping. I burst through the back door, slamming it shut behind me. I was gasping for air, my whole body trembling. My heart felt like it was going to explode. My mom was in the kitchen. She turned around, startled. "What in the world is wrong with you?" she asked, her voice sharp with alarm. I couldn't get the words out at first. I just stood there shaking, pointing back toward the door. There's something up there," I finally stammered, my voice a high-pitched squeak. "In the tree, a big monkey." I'll never forget the look on her face. It wasn't disbelief, not exactly. It was a different kind of fear, a knowing fear. Her eyes got wide and she came over to me, grabbing my shoulders. "What did you see?" she asked, her voice low and serious. "Tell me exactly." I described it as best I could, through my hiccuping breaths. The size, the dark hair, the way it was sitting, the swinging leg. The head that looked almost human. When I got to the part about the head, she went very still. She looked past me, out the window toward the levee. "The rabbits," she said almost to herself. Then she looked back at me. "I told you not to go up there. You leave food out, you attract things, you attract all kinds of things." She didn't say it was a bear. She didn't say I had an overactive imagination. She said, "You attract things." And the way she said it, with this heavy, resigned dread, was more terrifying than if she had screamed. It meant she believed me. It meant that what I saw was real, and that she understood the implications. We never, ever went over that levee again. Not me, not my parents. It became an unspoken rule, a forbidden line. The fear didn't go away. It settled over our house like a permanent shadow. Every time I looked out my window at night, toward the dark shape of the levee, I felt it watching me. I felt like it was still up there, sitting in that cottonwood, swinging its leg, just waiting. We moved away not long after that. The official reason was the Juan Corona murders that started happening in the area. That was a whole other kind of horror, a human one that was all over the news. It gave us a concrete, understandable reason to leave. But for me, we weren't running from a serial killer. We were running from what was on the other side of that levee. I'm an old man now. I've lived a whole life since then, but I've never forgotten. I've read stories, accounts from other people who've seen similar things. They call it Bigfoot or Sasquatch. The name doesn't matter. What matters is the feeling, the dry mouth, the frozen limbs, the casual, terrifying swing of a leg on a branch, the look in my mother's eyes that told me I hadn't seen a monster from a storybook. I'd seen something that was simply there, a part of the world that wasn't supposed to be seen. And sometimes, on a quiet, hot afternoon, when the light is just right, I can close my eyes and I'm right back on top of that levee, a terrified little kid staring at something I was never meant to see, and I can still feel it looking back. Story 15. It was back when my wife and I were working at this private school. She was young, we both were really. The school was way out near French Gulch, California, buried deep in the Trinity Mountains. If you've never been out there, it's hard to explain the kind of quiet that place has. It's not a peaceful quiet, it's a heavy one. You're about 25 miles into the woods behind Claire Engel Lake, on this winding dirt road that feels like it's trying to lose you. The only signs of life you'd see most days were the logging trucks, and even they were rare, just these giant groaning things that would shake the ground and then be gone, leaving the silence even louder than before. We lived in a little trailer on the school grounds. It was a clear night, one of those nights where the sky is so packed with stars, it looks fake. The air had that crisp, cold bite to it, the kind that makes your lungs feel clean, but also lets you know winter isn't messing around. Part of my job was doing bed checks around midnight, making sure all the kids in the boys' cabins were actually in their beds and not off trying to be Bear Grylls or something. To get to the boys' cabins, you had to cross this old suspension bridge over the creek. It wasn't long, maybe 50 or 60 feet, but it was old. The cables were thick and rust-streaked, and the wooden planks underfoot were weathered grey, with gaps between them, where you could see the dark water churning below. I'd crossed it 100 times, but it always gave me a little thrill of unease. That night, my boots thumped on the planks in a steady rhythm, and the whole bridge did its usual gentle sway. It was familiar. I was about halfway across when I heard it. From the direction of the cookhouse, over by the tree line, a snuffling sound, wet and loud, followed by a solid bang, like someone had hit one of the big metal trash cans with a sledgehammer. My first thought, my only sane thought, was bears. We had bears, black bears. They'd come down and rummage through the trash if it wasn't secured right. It was annoying, but it was normal. I finished crossing the bridge and stood on the other side for a second listening. The snuffling came again, more insistent now, and then another bang. I felt a spike of irritation more than fear. I didn't want to deal with a bear tearing up the cookhouse area, making a mess I'd have to explain in the morning. The creek bank was littered with smooth, heavy river rocks, worn down by the water. I bent down and picked up a couple, each one about the size of my fist. They were cold and solid in my hand. I started walking toward the noise, my boots crunching on the gravel path. The cookhouse was a dark shape ahead, its roof peaks just visible against the slightly lighter black of the sky. I could still hear the creature, the bear, I told myself, rooting around. I got close enough to see the silhouette of the trash cans, and I hurled one of the rocks in that general direction. I didn't aim to hit it, just to scare it off. The rock landed with a thud in the dirt nearby. The snuffling stopped. For a second, there was just the sound of the creek. Then, something moved. It was a dark shape, detaching itself from the deeper shadows near the cookhouse wall. It was big. I mean, I was expecting a bear, so I was ready for big, but this was different. It straightened up, it just rose, it came up from a crouch and just kept going. My brain sort of stuttered. A bear stands on its hind legs, sure, but it's hunched, top-heavy. This thing straightened up to its full height, and its head went up past the eaves of the cookhouse. I knew how tall that building was. The eaves were a good 8 feet off the ground. This thing's head cleared them. It had to be close to 10 feet tall. It wasn't a bear. The proportions were all wrong. It had these long, powerful-looking legs and a massive torso, but it stood erect, like a person, a gigantic, impossibly broad person. It just stood there for what felt like a full minute. but was probably only a couple of seconds, and I just stood there frozen, the other rock still cold in my hand, my brain screaming that this wasn't happening. Then it took a step, not a lumbering animal step, a stride, a purposeful human-like gait. It was coming toward me. The fear that hit me then was a physical thing. It was like a bucket of ice water had been dumped directly into my stomach, and it spread outwards, making my fingers tingle and my legs feel like rubber. I couldn't move. I just watched this shape walk toward the bridge. My bridge. The only way back to my trailer, to my wife, to safety. It stepped onto the first plank of the suspension bridge. The whole structure groaned. It was a sound I'd never heard it make before, a deep, protesting creak of metal and wood. The bridge, which usually swayed gently under my weight, visibly sagged. The cables went tight with a sharp, twanging sound. This thing was so heavy, it was bending the bridge. That broke my paralysis. I started backing up, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Hey!" I shouted. My voice came out as a strangled croak. I cleared my throat and tried again, louder. "Get out of here! Go on!" It kept coming. It was on the bridge now, maybe a third of the way across, moving with that same steady, unhurried stride. The bridge was swaying and dipping under its weight, the movement violent and unnatural. I could see it more clearly now, silhouetted against the starry sky. It was covered in dark hair, but it wasn't shaggy like a bear's. It looked more like a thick, matted pelt. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees. I still had the river rock in my hand. Without even thinking, a pure, panicked reaction, I threw it. I put my whole arm into it. The rock flew, a dark blur, and I heard it hit. It struck the thing square in the chest with a dull, solid thump. It stopped. It just stopped walking and turned its head toward me, and that's when I saw its eyes. They weren't reflective like a dog's or a cat's. They glowed. It wasn't a reflection of my flashlight. I didn't even have one on me. This was a faint, reddish-orange light coming from within the eyes themselves. It was the most terrifying thing I have ever seen. It wasn't an animal's dumb curiosity. There was something behind those eyes, something that was looking right at me, and it understood that I had just hit it. I fumbled on the ground for another rock, my hands shaking so bad I could barely grab one. I threw it, and it missed, clattering off one of the bridge cables. It was useless. I was throwing pebbles at a god. Then it moved again, but it didn't come for me. It reached up with one of those long, thick arms. Its hand, I'll never forget this, wrapped around the upper suspension cable. Its fingers were massive. It didn't just grab it, it took a firm hold, and then in a movement that was both incredibly powerful and strangely graceful, it vaulted itself over the side. It didn't fall, it swung. It used its own weight and the cable to swing its body up and over the railing, clearing it completely, and dropped down below the bridge, out of my sight. There was a huge splash from the creek. Not the kind of splash a falling body makes, but a powerful, deliberate one, like it had jumped in and was moving. I didn't wait. I didn't look over the edge. I turned and I ran. I ran like I have never run before in my life. My legs, which had felt like jelly a moment before, were now pure adrenaline. I pounded across the rest of the bridge, not caring about the noise, not caring about anything except putting distance between me and that thing. I hit the gravel path on my side and sprinted for my trailer. The whole time my ears were straining and I could hear it. I could hear it running in the creek. It wasn't splashing around. It was moving with purpose, its heavy footfalls sloshing through the water, heading upstream away from the school. The sound of it moving through the water was fast, terrifyingly fast. And then there was the smell. As I ran, a wave of stench hit me so hard it almost made me gag. It's the only way I can describe it. It smelled like a dead animal that had been left to rot in the sun, mixed with the worst body odor you can imagine, a pungent, sour smell of sweat and something else, something foul and musky. It filled the air, clinging to the back of my throat. I could taste it. I didn't stop running until I was at the steps of my trailer. I yanked the door open, stumbled inside, and slammed it shut, locking it with a hand that was trembling so violently I could barely turn the deadbolt. I was breathing in ragged, painful gasps, my chest heaving. My wife was sitting on the couch reading a book under the lamplight. She looked up, her face instantly shifting from calm to concern. "Shannon, what's wrong? You're white as a sheet." I just stood there, leaning against the door, still gripping a river rock I didn't even remember picking up on my mad dashback. I tried to form words, to tell her about the thing on the bridge, the glowing eyes, the smell, but all that came out was a shaky breath. Did you hear anything?" I finally managed. "Just now? From the creek?" She looked at me like I was crazy. "Hear what?" "No, nothing. What happened?" I looked at her normal worried face in our normal warm trailer, and the sheer ordinariness of it all made what had just happened feel even more insane, more impossible. I had just faced down a 10-foot-tall monster that smelled like death, and here, 30 seconds away, life was going on as if nothing had happened. The disconnect was dizzying. I never found out what it was. I told a few people, the ones in charge, but they wrote it off as a bear, a big bear. They said the glowing eyes were just a trick of the light, that I was spooked, that it was dark. But I know what I saw. I know the difference between a bear standing up and something that is built to stand. I know the sound a rock makes when it hits muscle, not fur. I know what true, gut-wrenching terror feels like. I never did the midnight bed checks alone again. I made up excuses. I never went near that bridge after dark if I could help it. That smell, that image of it rising up over the cookhouse eaves, the way the bridge sagged under its weight, it's burned into me. It's been years, and I still dream about those glowing eyes sometimes. I never identified it. I just know, with a certainty that sits cold in my gut, that it wasn't a bear. And I'm left with this chilling, lifelong curiosity about what exactly is still out there, walking through those deep, dark woods in the Trinity Mountains. Story 16. All right, I'll just type this out. I don't know if anyone will believe me, and honestly, I don't even care anymore. I just need to get it out there, to write it down somewhere so it's not just bouncing around in my own head. This happened back in the mid-90s. I was in my late 20s, and I used to go camping by myself all the time up around the Nemo Lakes area on Vancouver Island. I'd been doing it since I was a kid with my dad, knew those woods pretty well, or at least I thought I did. This particular trip was in the summer. I'd taken a Friday off work, packed my old Ford pickup, and driven up the logging roads until I found my spot. It was a place I'd been to a bunch of times before. A nice little clearing not too far from one of the smaller lakes, with a good fire pit already built up from previous campers. The first day was perfect. I set up my tent, got a fire going, cooked some hot dogs, and just enjoyed the quiet. The kind of quiet where you can hear every little rustle in the bushes, every bird call. It was peaceful. I remember sitting by the fire that first night, feeling completely at ease, just me and the woods. I went to sleep without a worry in the world. The next day, the second day, was also totally normal. I spent the morning fishing, didn't catch much, but it didn't matter. I hiked around a bit, read a book, just lounged. I made a bigger dinner that evening, some canned stew heated up in a pot on the grill over the fire. As the sun went down, I remember feeling that good kind of tired you get from a day outside. I banked the fire so it would just be coals, brushed my teeth with some bottled water, and zipped myself into my tent. It was a warm night, so I left the rain fly off, just the mesh screen between me and the stars. I fell asleep almost instantly. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. It was still pitch black out, the middle of the night. The kind of dark you only get deep in the woods, where your eyes can't adjust to anything. I was awake, and I was instantly alert. You know that feeling when you're jerked out of sleep and your heart is already hammering, but you don't know why yet. I lay there in my sleeping bag, not moving a muscle, just listening, and that's when I heard it. It was a sound, but not an animal sound, not a deer stepping on a twig, not a raccoon rustling through the undergrowth. This was heavy, a steady, rhythmic crunch, crunch, crunch. Like something very big and very heavy was walking, taking slow, deliberate steps. It was circling my tent. I held my breath, my ears straining. There were no voices, no grunts, no sniffing, just that slow, crushing footfall on the dry ground and pine needles. It wasn't trying to be quiet. It felt like it was letting me know it was there. The circle was wide, I could tell, because the sound would fade a little as it moved behind a thicker clump of trees on one side of the clearing, then get louder again as it came around. My mind was racing, trying to place it. A bear? Maybe. But bears don't usually just walk in perfect, patient circles. They snuffle, they huff, they're curious or looking for food. This was different. This felt purposeful. I must have lain there for what felt like an hour, just listening to it walk around me. My whole body was tense, my fists clenched inside the sleeping bag. I was scared, yeah, but there was also this weird, creeping feeling of being studied, like I was a bug in a jar, and something was just watching me, deciding what to do. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to do something. Moving as slowly and quietly as I could, I unzipped my sleeping bag. The sound of the zipper seemed deafening. The footsteps outside stopped immediately. My blood went cold. It had heard me. I froze halfway out of the bag, not even daring to breathe. The silence was somehow worse than the footsteps. It was a heavy, waiting silence. I could feel the presence out there, just standing in the dark, listening back. After a minute that felt like 10, the footsteps started again. Crunch, crunch, starting up right where they'd left off. That's when the real fear set in. It wasn't some dumb animal wandering through. It knew I was in here. It was interacting with me. I knew I needed a bigger fire. Light. I needed light. My flashlight was a big, heavy metal mag light, the kind that feels like a club. I gripped it tight. With shaking hands, I crawled to the tent flap and very, very slowly pulled the zipper down. The sound was agonizingly loud. The footsteps didn't stop this time. They just kept on with that same steady pace. Crunch, crunch. I pushed the tent flap open and crawled out onto the cool ground. The air was chilly. I could see the dull red glow of the fire pit. I stayed low, crouching, and scuttled over to the wood pile I'd made. My eyes were useless in the dark, so I kept my flashlight off, not wanting to draw attention to myself just yet. I could still hear it walking, over to my left now, somewhere just beyond the ring of trees that bordered the clearing. I fumbled with the wood, my hands trembling so bad I could barely stack a few pieces onto the coals. I blew on them, and a few flames licked up, casting a flickering, dancing light that made the shadows around the clearing jump and writhe. As soon as the fire caught properly and flared up, the footsteps stopped again. And then, from the direction they'd last come from, there was a sound that made me jump out of my skin. It was a loud, sharp crack, not a small twig snap. This was a branch, a thick one, like a man's forearm being broken in two. It wasn't an accident. It was a violent, powerful sound, like it had been ripped apart. I scrambled back from the fire, pointing my mag light toward the sound, but I still didn't turn it on. I was too scared. My heart was pounding in my ears. I could see the shadows from the fire moving, and for a second, I thought I saw one of the shadows separate from the others. A tall, thick shadow that moved and then was gone. My mind was screaming, "Bear! It has to be a bear." But something in my gut, some primal part of my brain, was telling me that was wrong. Then the rocks started. The first one landed with a hard thud in the dirt, maybe 15 feet to my right. I flinched hard, my whole body jerking. It was followed a few seconds later by another one, this one landing closer, maybe 10 feet away, skidding a little in the soil. They weren't little pebbles. These were decent-sized rocks, the kind you'd have to pick up and throw. I finally flicked on the maglite. The beam cut through the dark, and I swept it shakily across the tree line. Nothing, just the trunks of the pines and the ferns underneath, looking pale and strange in the artificial light. The beam was bright, but it only reached so far, and beyond it was just a wall of blackness. Another rock came flying out of that blackness. This one was bigger, about the size of my fist. It didn't land near me, though. It sailed in a high arc and hit my blue plastic cooler with a loud, hollow bonk, knocking it over and spilling my beer and food containers onto the ground. That did it. That was the moment the fear turned into pure, undiluted terror. This thing wasn't just trying to scare me. It was throwing rocks. It had aim. It was targeting my stuff. My mind was completely rejecting what was happening. This wasn't in the rulebook for camping. This wasn't a cougar or a bear. This was something else. I kept the light trained on the trees where the rock had come from, my arms shaking so badly the beam was jittering all over the place. And that's when I saw it. Between two thick pine trunks, maybe 40 or 50 feet away, my light caught a shape. It was tall, way taller than a man, and broad. It was just a silhouette, black against the slightly less black forest behind it, but I could see the outline. It was upright, on two legs, with massive shoulders. It wasn't lanky. It was solid, thick. It wasn't a bear standing up. Bears look top-heavy. Their legs look wrong when they stand. This thing was proportioned like a person, but a huge, powerful person. The head was blocky, set directly on those huge shoulders with no real neck, but it wasn't the shape that got me. It was the feeling. When the light hit it, I felt this wave of intensity. It's the only way I can describe it. It wasn't looking at the light. It felt like it was looking right through the light, right at me. I felt its attention like a physical weight, a pressure in my chest. It was a feeling of pure, raw presence. It knew I was there. It knew I was looking at it. And it was letting me look. There was no aggression, no roaring, no charging. It was just standing there, utterly still, and its stillness was more terrifying than any movement could have been. I don't know how long we stayed like that, me with my shaking light on it. It just standing there in the trees. It might have been 3 seconds. It might have been 30. Time just stopped. My brain short-circuited. All I could process was the sheer size of it and that overwhelming, intelligent presence. Then I broke. My survival instincts finally overrode the paralysis. I didn't scream. I didn't throw up. I just turned and ran. I scrambled for my truck, which was parked on the edge of the clearing. I fumbled with the keys, my hands slick with sweat, dropping them once in the dirt before I managed to get the door open. I threw myself inside, yanked the door shut, and hit the lock. The solid thunk of the lock engaging was the best sound I'd ever heard. I was panting, gasping for air, my whole body trembling uncontrollably. I sat there in the driver's seat, clutching the steering wheel, and looked out the windshield. The fire was still burning, casting its weird, moving light. I couldn't see the thing anymore. The forest was just a dark wall again. For a long time, nothing happened. I just sat there, my heart slowly settling from a gallop to a hard, fast thrum. Maybe I imagined it, I started to think. Maybe it was a bear, and the shadows messed with my head. The silence was total. Then, from the same part of the woods, another rock flew out. It landed with a heavy thump in the middle of the clearing, kicking up a little puff of dirt. A few minutes later, another one followed, landing near my tent. It wasn't a barrage, just one rock every so often. It was a reminder. I'm still here. And that's how it went for hours. I sat in that truck, staring out into the darkness, jumping at every little night sound, waiting for the next rock. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I just watched and listened. The thing never showed itself again, never made another sound except for the occasional, measured thud of a rock hitting the ground. It was toying with me, letting me know it had me cornered. The feeling of being hunted, of being played with, was unbearable. I felt like a mouse in a cage with a cat that was just batting it around. The night seemed to last forever. I watched the stars slowly wheel across the sky through the windshield. I watched the fire die down to embers. The rock stopped coming after a while, but I didn't dare move. I just sat there, locked in, waiting for the sun. Finally, the blackness started to soften to grey. The shapes of the trees began to separate from the darkness. Birds started to chirp, tentatively at first, then in a full-on dawn chorus. The normal world was coming back. When there was enough light to see clearly, I scanned the tree line. Nothing. It was just a peaceful forest again. I waited another half hour, just to be sure, my nerves still completely shot. Then slowly I unlocked the door and stepped out. The morning air was crisp and clean. My campsite was a mess. The cooler on its side, my stuff scattered, the dead fire. It felt violated. I knew I had to look, I had to know. My legs felt like jelly as I walked toward the spot where I'd seen it standing. I stopped about 20 feet away from the tree line and looked at the ground. There, in the soft, moist soil between the pine needles, were footprints. They weren't bear tracks. They were huge, long, barefoot-looking impressions, but wider than any human foot I'd ever seen. They were deep, showing the thing's immense weight. I could see the outline of a broad heel and 5 toes. I didn't get closer. I didn't need to. The proof was right there, pressed into the earth. It hadn't been my imagination. It was real. I didn't bother packing anything neatly. I threw my tent, my sleeping bag, my cooler, everything into the back of the truck in a tangled heap. I didn't care. I just wanted to be gone. I got in, started the engine, and drove out of there as fast as the rough logging road would allow. I didn't look back. I never went camping by myself again. I tried to tell a couple of the guys at work about it a few weeks later over a beer. They laughed, clapped me on the back, said I'd probably just seen a big buck and spooked myself. I didn't argue. I just nodded and changed the subject. What was the point? They hadn't been there. They hadn't felt that presence. That intelligent, watching stillness. They hadn't sat in a truck for hours, listening to rocks land in the dirt, thrown by something that shouldn't exist. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And sometimes, on a really quiet night, when the wind is just right, I can still remember the sound of those heavy, steady footsteps circling my tent, and that feeling of not being alone in the woods anymore. I never was again. Story 17. Okay, so I've been sitting on this for a while, and I don't really know how to start, but I need to get it out there. Maybe typing it will make it feel less real, or maybe it'll just freak me out all over again. But here goes. It was one of those warm, sticky evenings in Alabama, the kind where the air feels heavy and everything smells like cut grass and damp earth. My wife and I were outside our house, just hanging out on the porch steps. We'd been there for maybe an hour or so, just unwinding after a long week. I remember the sky was starting to shift from blue to this deep orangey purple, and the fireflies were already blinking in the yard. We had a bottle of whiskey between us. Nothing fancy, just something cheap we picked up from the store, and we were passing it back and forth, taking sips and laughing about stupid stuff. Old inside jokes, work gossip, whatever. The kind of laughing that makes your stomach hurt and your eyes water. We were being loud, I know that now. But at the time it felt good to just let loose. The woods across the street have always been there, thick and dark, like a wall of trees. We've lived here for years, and I've never thought much about them. Sometimes you hear animals, owls, coyotes, whatever, but it's usually background noise. That night, though, everything changed. We were in the middle of a laugh. My wife was wiping tears from her eyes, and then it happened. This sound cut through the air, and it wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. It was a high-pitched scream, but not like a person or an animal I knew. It was mocking, almost like it was mimicking our laughter, but twisted into something ugly and sharp. It came from deep in the woods, and it echoed. like it was bouncing off the trees. I froze for a second, and I saw my wife's smile just drop. Her face went pale. My first instinct was to be a smartass, I guess. I don't know why. Maybe the whiskey, or just trying to brush it off. I stood up and yelled back toward the woods, something stupid like, "Yeah, real funny. You got us." I didn't think anything of it. It was just a gut reaction. But the second the words left my mouth, the air went cold. I'm not exaggerating. It felt like the temperature dropped in an instant, like someone had opened a freezer door. The screams stopped, and for a heartbeat, there was silence. Then, this quieter sound came, but it was closer, way closer than it should have been. It wasn't a scream anymore. It was like a quip, this low, whispering noise that sounded almost like words, but not any language I know. It was taunting, and it filled the space around us, seeping into my ears. That's when the fear hit me, not just nervousness, but this overwhelming, gut-wrenching terror that made my legs feel weak. My wife grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin, and she was trembling. I could feel her shaking against me. I turned my back to the woods, trying to act tough, like I wasn't scared, but inside I was panicking. And then it happened. This force, like a psychic grip, wrapped around my head. It's hard to describe, but it wasn't physical. It was like a pressure in my mind, squeezing my thoughts, and a voice clear as day spoke inside my head. It wasn't my voice. It was deep and cold, and it said, "You should not have done that." I swear, I felt it in my bones. My whole body went rigid, and for a second I couldn't move. It was like I was paralyzed, just standing there with this voice echoing in my skull. I don't know how long it lasted, maybe a few seconds, but it felt like forever. When I snapped out of it, I grabbed my wife's hand, and we both just bolted for the door. We weren't thinking, just running. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get the door open. We stumbled inside, and I slammed it shut, locking it immediately. My wife was crying, not loud sobs, but this quiet, choked weeping that scared me more than anything. I could hear her gasping for air, and I was right there with her, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. We leaned against the door, both of us trying to catch our breath, and I remember the smell of our own sweat and the whiskey on our clothes mixing with the fear. We didn't say much at first. I checked all the locks on the doors and windows, my hands still trembling. The house felt different, smaller, like the walls were closing in. We ended up in the living room, sitting on the floor with our backs against the couch, just listening. Every little noise made us jump. The creak of the house settling, the hum of the fridge. We kept the lights off because we didn't want to draw attention, but that made it worse. The shadows in the room seemed to move, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. After what felt like hours, we decided to go to the bedroom. It's on the second floor, and we thought maybe we'd feel safer up there. We crept up the stairs, holding hands, and I remember how the wooden steps groaned under our weight. In the bedroom, we didn't turn on the light. We just collapsed onto the bed, still fully dressed. My wife was curled up next to me, and I could feel her shivering. I wrapped my arms around her, trying to comfort her, but I was just as scared. We lay there in the dark, listening to the silence, and that's when I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something outside the window. Our bedroom looks out over the backyard, and there's a big oak tree near the house. But this wasn't the tree. It was a tall shadow, darker than the night around it, just standing there. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, or my eyes playing games, but it didn't move. It was just staring. I couldn't see details, no face, no features, but I knew it was looking right at us. It was tall, really tall, like over 7 feet, and it had this presence that made the air feel thick. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, and I nudged my wife. She saw it too, and she let out this tiny whimper, burying her face in my shoulder. We didn't dare move, didn't dare make a sound. We just watched it, and it watched us, for what felt like an eternity. I could feel its gaze, like a weight on my skin, and it was menacing, full of this quiet anger that made my stomach churn. Eventually, after maybe 10 minutes, it just vanished. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. We didn't see it move away. It was like it dissolved into the darkness. We stayed in bed, too scared to get up, and eventually we must have fallen asleep from exhaustion. The next morning, everything seemed normal. The sun was out, birds were chirping, and part of me wanted to believe it was all a bad dream or the whiskey playing tricks. But we both knew it wasn't. We avoided talking about it for a few days, but the fear lingered. We started locking everything earlier, and we didn't go outside after dark anymore. Weeks went by and we tried to move on, but I couldn't shake the memory of that voice in my head or the shadow at the window. Then one Saturday morning, I was mowing the lawn and I decided to check the area under our bedroom window. I don't know why, maybe just a gut feeling. The grass was damp from dew, and that's when I saw it. A large footprint pressed into the soft ground near the foundation. It was huge, way bigger than any human foot, with a shape that wasn't quite right, long toes, deep impressions. I measured it later. It was about 18 inches long. I called my wife over, and she saw it too. We just stood there, staring, and I felt that same cold fear wash over me. It confirmed everything, and in that moment I knew we weren't crazy. We never saw the shadow again, and we haven't heard any more screams. But that day changed us. We don't laugh outside at night anymore, and we're always aware of the woods across the street. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed, I still hear that voice in my head, and I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't yelled back. I don't have any answers, and I probably never will. All I know is that something was out there, and it knew we were there too. Story 18. Okay, so this happened back in 2006. I've never really talked about it in detail before, but I guess it's time. My husband and I decided to go camping in this wooded valley in Georgia that he remembered from when he was a kid. He'd always talked about how peaceful it was, how you could hear the creek running and nothing else. Sounded perfect for a weekend away from everything. We drove out there on a Friday afternoon in late September. The air was still warm, but you could feel that chill starting to creep in once the sun went down. The valley was exactly how he described it. Thick woods on either side, with a narrow dirt road leading in. We parked the truck near the entrance because the path down to the sandbar was too rough for driving. We had to hike in about half a mile, carrying our tent, sleeping bags, and a cooler. I remember the smell of pine and damp earth, and the way the light filtered through the trees, making everything look golden. The sandbar was this little strip of pale sand right by the creek, maybe 30 feet across, with the water shallow and clear. It felt like our own private spot. There was only one trail in and out, which my husband pointed out made it feel safe. No one could sneak up on us without us seeing them. We set up the tent quickly, him doing most of the heavy lifting while I gathered firewood. We built a small fire pit with rocks we found nearby, and I remember laughing about how we were probably overdoing it with the marshmallows we brought. As the sun started to drop, the woods got quiet. Not just quiet, but dead silent. Like 1 minute there were birds chirping and squirrels rustling, and the next nothing. It was eerie. I've been camping before, and forests always have some noise, but this was different. It felt like everything had just stopped. My husband noticed it too. He kept looking around, his brow furrowed. We tried to brush it off, saying maybe a predator was nearby, like a bear or something, but it didn't feel right. Then, just as full darkness settled in, this scream ripped through the silence. I've never heard anything like it. It wasn't human, and it wasn't an animal I knew. It was ear-splitting, high-pitched but guttural, like it was tearing out of something's throat. It echoed off the valley walls, and I felt my heart jump into my mouth. My husband grabbed my arm, and we both froze. The scream lasted maybe 5 seconds, but it felt like forever. After it stopped, the silence was even heavier. That's when we heard the footsteps, heavy two-legged thuds, like someone big was walking through the woods nearby. Not running, just pacing. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like it was coming from the tree line on the other side of the creek. We shone our flashlights over there, but the beams didn't reach far enough. Just a wall of darkness. The footsteps kept going, slow and deliberate, and I could feel the vibration through the ground. My hands were shaking so bad, I almost dropped the flashlight. We decided to get inside the tent. It felt safer, even though it was just nylon between us and whatever was out there. We zipped it up and sat there in the dark, listening. The footsteps stopped for a bit, and then we heard splashes in the creek. Not like a fish jumping, but big splashes, like someone was wading through the water. My husband whispered that it might be a deer, but deer don't walk on two legs. The splashes got closer, and then something brushed against the side of the tent. I let out a gasp, and my husband shushed me, his hand tight on my shoulder. He grabbed his .22 rifle. He'd brought it for protection, just in case. It was a small caliber, enough to scare off animals, or so we thought. He unzipped the tent flap just enough to peek out, and I held my flashlight, pointing it toward the sound. That's when we saw the eyes, large, green, and pupilless, like glowing orbs in the beam. They were about 6 feet off the ground, and they were staring right at us. I felt a cold sweat break out all over my body. My breath caught in my throat, and I couldn't move. My husband didn't hesitate. He fired 3 shots into the air, hoping to scare whatever it was away. The sound was deafening in the quiet, and the flashes lit up the area for a split second. But instead of running, the thing took 3 steps toward us. 3 slow, heavy steps that made the ground shake. I could see its shape now, tall, bulky, covered in dark hair or shadow, but those eyes were fixed on us. It didn't make a sound, just stood there, and I felt this primal fear wash over me. We were trapped. The tent felt like a death trap, and the only way out was past that thing. My husband fumbled for his phone. It was an old flip phone, and the signal was weak, but he managed to get a bar. He called a friend who lived about an hour away, his voice shaky as he explained we were in trouble and needed help now. He didn't go into details, just said something was out here with us. The friend said he'd come as fast as he could. We stayed in the tent, listening. The thing didn't move again, but we could feel its presence, like a weight pressing down on us. The air was cold and I was shivering, but not from the temperature. My teeth were chattering and I had to clamp my jaw shut to stop them. Time dragged on. Every rustle of leaves made me jump. We could hear the thing breathing now, a low, raspy sound that didn't seem to fit any animal I knew. It was just standing there watching us. I kept thinking about that one trail out and how we'd have to run past it if we tried to leave. My husband had the rifle ready, but he was pale, and I could see the fear in his eyes. He's not the type to scare easily. He's a rational guy, works in construction, deals with tough situations all the time, but this had him rattled. After what felt like hours, we heard a car engine in the distance. Our friend was coming down the dirt road, his headlights cutting through the trees. The thing must have heard it too, because it turned and moved away, its footsteps fading into the woods. We didn't wait. We scrambled out of the tent, grabbed what we could, and ran up the trail toward the road. I didn't look back, but I could feel something following us, not running, just keeping pace, like it was herding us out. The whole way, I had this sensation of being watched, and the hair on my neck stood up. When we reached the truck, our friend was there, his face worried. We threw our stuff in the back and jumped in, not even bothering to secure it. As we drove away, I glanced back and saw those green eyes in the trees, just watching us leave. I didn't say anything. I just stared until we turned the corner and they were gone. We went back a few times after that, once with the sheriff's deputy because we wanted to report it, but nothing ever came of it. The deputy, a no-nonsense guy, walked around with us and saw the dome-like structure of bent trees, like someone or something had twisted them into a shelter. He didn't say much, but he looked spooked, and he told us to stay away. Every time we returned, something would happen, strange noises, things moving, and we'd end up leaving in a hurry. It's been years and I still don't know what it was, but I know it was real. And that day, trapped on that sandbar, is burned into my memory like it happened yesterday. Story 19. Okay, I'm just going to type this out. I don't know if anyone will believe me, and honestly, I don't even care if you do. I just need to get it out of my system because I haven't slept right since it happened. My hands are still a little shaky thinking about it. It was the middle of August last year, a Saturday. The heat was the kind of thick, wet blanket you only get in Georgia, the air so heavy with humidity it felt like you were drinking it. I'd spent the whole morning getting the backyard ready, mowed the lawn even though it was scorching, set up the old picnic table, dragged the good cooler out from the garage and filled it with ice and beer and soda. I'd fired up the big charcoal grill around 4 in the afternoon, the heat from it making the air shimmer, the smell of burning briquettes mixing with the scent of cut grass. My friends started trickling in around 5. It was just a small group, maybe 7 or 8 of us. We've all been friends since high school, so these get-togethers are easy. Nobody putting on airs, just burgers, dogs, a few sides, and a lot of laughing. The backyard is pretty good sized. It backs up onto a thick stretch of woods that belongs to the county, so there's nothing back there but trees for miles. I've always liked the privacy. That night, I wasn't so sure. The sun was starting to go down, maybe around 7:30, 8 o'clock. That golden hour light was cutting through the trees, long shadows stretching across the lawn. We were all scattered around. A couple of the guys were by the grill, arguing about the best way to tell if a burger was done. A few others were sitting at the picnic table just talking. I was standing near the back porch steps, nursing a beer, feeling that pleasant, full-belly tiredness you get after eating. The cicadas were screaming, that constant buzzing hum that's the soundtrack to a Georgia summer night. It was normal, perfectly, completely normal. I was just looking out toward the tree line, not really looking at anything in particular, just zoning out when I saw it. Movement. It wasn't a deer. I've seen plenty of deer. They move with a kind of skittish grace. This was different. It was a shift of something dark, something big, behind a cluster of pines and water oaks about 50 feet into the woods from my property line. My brain tried to file it away as a trick of the light, the shadow of a branch swaying, but the air was dead still. There wasn't even a breeze. I squinted, my grip tightening on my beer bottle. "Hey," I said, but my voice came out quiet, more of a croak. No one heard me over the chatter and laughter. Then I saw it again, a solid, dark shape, detaching itself from the deeper shadows of the trees. It stepped sideways behind a thick pine trunk, but it was too big to be fully hidden. I could see the outline of it, a massive, dark-haired shoulder, an arm that looked too long, hanging by its side. My heart did this weird stutter skip in my chest. I felt cold, even in the muggy heat. "Guys," I said, louder this time. My friend Mark, who was closest to me, turned. "What's up, man? You see a snake or something?" He was smiling. I just pointed, my hand wasn't steady, in the trees. He followed my gaze, his smile fading. One by one, the others noticed we'd gone quiet. The conversation died down. The only sound was the relentless cicadas. Everyone was looking now, and that's when it took another step forward into a small gap between two trees. We all froze. I mean, completely frozen. It was like someone had hit a pause button on the whole world. It was tall, so damn tall. Its head was easily 8 feet off the ground, maybe more. It was built, not just tall, but broad, with huge, rounded shoulders that sloped down into these powerful-looking arms. Its whole body was covered in hair, but it wasn't like a bear's fur. It was long, shaggy, and looked almost black in the fading light, but with a reddish tint in places, like old, wet bark. But the worst part, the part that I can still see when I close my eyes, was its face, or what I could see of it. The snout wasn't long like a dog's, but it wasn't flat like a man's either. It was just there. And the eyes, they were red. I'm not talking a little pink or a reflection. These were two solid, glowing coals of deep, burning red. There was no white to them, just this hellish, luminous color, and they were fixed on us, unblinking. It didn't make a sound. It didn't growl or huff or snap a twig. It just stood there, half hidden by the trees, and watched us. Its head was tilted down slightly, those red pins of light staring right through the distance, right into the center of our little party. The silence from our group was absolute. I could hear my own blood pounding in my ears. Someone, I think it was Sarah, let out this tiny choked gasp like she'd been holding her breath and it just escaped. I felt a primal fear, something old and deep in my bones, just locked my legs in place. This wasn't curiosity. This wasn't seeing a cool animal. This was the feeling you get when you know, on some fundamental level, that you are being looked at by something that sees you as prey or as an intruder. I don't know which was worse. It was so still, its chest didn't even seem to be moving. It was like a statue, a monstrous living statue with burning eyes. My brain was screaming at me, a jumble of thoughts. Bear? No. No bear stands like that. No bear has shoulders like that. Man in a suit. The idea was insane. Who would be out here in the middle of nowhere in a suit that detailed that realistic standing perfectly still in the woods behind my house? And the eyes. You can't fake that kind of glow. It wasn't a reflection. The light was coming from them. The word formed in my head, a word I'd only ever heard in stupid TV shows and campfire stories. Bigfoot. And the moment I thought it, I knew it was true. This was it. This was the thing. It was in my backyard. The creature's head moved, just a slight, almost imperceptible turn. Its gaze swept over our group, from left to right, tracking us. It felt calculating, intelligent. It wasn't the blank stare of an animal. It was assessing us. That's when the slow retreat started. I don't know who moved first. It might have been me. We didn't turn and run. Every instinct was screaming at us not to make any sudden moves, not to trigger a chase. It was like we were all connected by the same wire of terror. We began to back up inch by agonizing inch toward the back door of my house. I couldn't look away from its eyes. That intense, unblinking stare was holding me, pinning me in place even as my feet shuffled backward. The red glow seemed to intensify, as if it knew we were trying to get away, and it was drinking in our fear. I could feel the weight of its attention on my skin, a physical pressure. My skin was crawling, covered in goosebumps, despite the sweat soaking my t-shirt. The world had shrunk to the space between me and those red eyes. The laughter from just minutes before felt like it belonged to another lifetime. The smell of grilled meat, which had been so appealing, now just turned my stomach. All I could smell was my own sweat and the damp, earthy scent of the woods. My heel hit the first wooden step of the porch. The thud was incredibly loud in the silence. I stumbled, my balance gone for a second, and my eyes finally broke from its gaze as I looked down to steady myself. The spell was momentarily broken. I risked a glance at the others. Their faces were sheets of white, eyes wide with a horror I knew was mirrored on my own. No one spoke. We just kept moving, a terrified, slow-motion crab walk up the steps and onto the porch. Once we were all on the porch, a little more shielded by the roof's overhang, a tiny bit of the paralysis broke. "The door," Mark whispered, his voice rough and dry. "Get to the door." We shuffled backward across the wooden deck. My back was to the house now, and it felt all wrong. I didn't want to turn my back on that thing. I kept twisting my head, looking over my shoulder, expecting to see it had closed the distance in a single silent bound. My hand fumbled behind me, searching for the screen door handle. I found the cold metal, yanked it open. The sound of the spring stretching was a screech in the quiet. We piled inside, a tangle of limbs and panic. I was the last one in. Just before I slammed the solid wood door shut, I took one last look into the yard. It was still there, standing in the same spot, but its head was tilted up now, and those red eyes were looking directly at me at the door. It felt like a final acknowledgement, a confirmation that it had seen us, that it knew where we lived. I slammed the door so hard the frame shook. I threw the deadbolt, my fingers slipping on the metal, and then I leaned against it, my whole body trembling. For a second, nobody said anything. We were all just breathing loud, ragged breaths in the dark of my kitchen. Then the questions started, tumbling over each other in hushed, frantic voices. Did you see that? What the hell was that? The eyes, oh my God, the eyes were red. Was it a bear? It wasn't a bear, I said, my own voice sounding foreign to me. You know it wasn't a bear. We all crowded into the living room, which has a big window looking out onto the backyard. We didn't turn on any lights. We just stood there in the gloom, peering out into the deepening twilight. The yard was empty. The tree line was a solid wall of black. We stood there for what felt like an hour, just watching. Nothing moved. The creature was gone. It had just vanished, melted back into the woods as silently as it had appeared. Eventually we turned on a lamp. We sat down on the couches and the floor. The normalcy of my living room, with its TV and video game controllers and throw pillows, felt like a bizarre dream. We were all in shock. Someone started crying quietly. I just felt numb, hollowed out, and then we talked. We went around the room, each of us describing what we saw. And the crazy thing, the thing that still chills me to the bone, is that we all described the same thing: the immense height, the dark, shaggy hair, the impossibly broad shoulders and long arms, and those glowing, unblinking red eyes. There was no disagreement. No one said, "I think it was just a shadow," or "maybe it was a trick of the light." We had all seen the same impossible creature. We had all felt the same soul-deep terror. They left not long after in a group, their cars peeling out of my driveway faster than they should have. I was left alone in the house. I locked every door and window, even though I knew on some level that locks wouldn't matter. Not against that. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room chair, in the dark, staring out at the black shape of the woods. Every rustle of a leaf, every creak of the house made my heart jump into my throat. I kept expecting to see two red dots of light appear at the tree line, watching the house, waiting. The next morning, when the sun was fully up, I went outside. The backyard was just my backyard again. The grill was cold. A few forgotten paper plates were on the picnic table. It all looked so ordinary. I walked to the edge of the lawn, right up to the property line. I looked into the woods, at the spot where it had stood. I didn't go in. I couldn't make myself. The ground was soft from recent rain, and I could see something. Indentations. They weren't clear footprints, not like in the movies. They were just deep, heavy depressions in the pine needles and mud, too big to be a deer, too close together to be a bear. And there was a smell, a musky, foul odor that hung in the air right in that one spot, a smell that wasn't there anywhere else in the yard. I went back inside. I haven't had a cookout since. I look out at those woods every single day, and I never see anything, but I feel it. I feel like those red eyes are still out there, somewhere in the deep shadows, just watching. And I know with a certainty that sits like a stone in my gut that what we saw was real. We all agreed on it. And that's the part that haunts me the most. The agreement. The shared, undeniable truth of it. It was there. It saw us. And then it was gone.